Chapter 11 Visit. The Underworld Gremory Territory. A heavy sigh was heard throughout the empty library of the Gremory Mansion, as Rias was sitting with a mountain of homework, most of it being basic training and how to be a good king, and other was advanced battle strategy. She had been hitting the books for a whole week straight now, only talking to her mother who would come by every other day, as well as her nephew Milica's. She was worried about peerage, mostly worried that they wouldn't learn anything or become stronger. She was also worried about Issei, as he had been acting weird the night before he was sent to train Saji. It was so unlike him to be silent and not make a single comment, almost like he was dealing with something internal. Even when she tried to get an answer out of him, he gave very little information and had managed to switch the topic and then feed her ego by letting her be on top. Rias felt annoyed that he wouldn't tell her his problems, but it also slightly made her happy that he was still able to fight back. It made him more fun to be with. If one of the maids or her family had been in the room, they could see a slightly creepy smile on Ria's face, as well as a blush she just shouldn't have. Her thoughts were anything but pure, as she enjoyed these little things about Issei way too much in a not very pure way. Hopefully he will tell me when he is done with that Ida. Rias suddenly changed her face's expression back to that of her boredom as she heard the faint sound of someone coming, as light steps were heard throughout the halls of the library. She breathed out then in, before turning back to her work, trying to make it look like she was working. She kept listening for where the person was going, and judging by how loud and close their footsteps sounded, she could only guess they were here to talk with her. So then the second question, who was it? Thanks to the many magical books, few artifacts and such around in the library, her senses become quite dull, and she has a harder time detecting people. I can hear that they're wearing shoes, so most likely a man. They sound a bit heavy, so it could be father or maybe Azazel. Guess I'll know when they show up fully. Rias thought as she began to focus a bit more on her work, still listening in on the man walking towards her. He had a fast step, as he would take a step every other second, instead of the other people she would normally hear, who took around a second or two for each step. She could guess they wanted to see her, which led her to think it could maybe be her brother. Then the walking stopped. The last step had been taken just on the other side of a bookcase, containing, funnily enough, a detailed history of the Gremories. Rias turned towards it, waiting for him to turn the corner and show himself. She was getting quite interested in knowing who this person could be. Her three main guests were still her father, Azazel, and her older brother, all for the fact they would be the only people to interrupt her outside of her nephew and mother. She heard a knock from the other side of the bookcase, making her smile a bit, as this person was treating this bookcase like a door to a room. A door to Rias' room. "You may enter," Rias spoke, giggling a bit at the slightly childish approach of this person. But she was not ready for who came out from around the corner, and the first to sit her off was the lightly gold-like skin reminding her of a yellow moon. Then the long logs of black and golden hair, and underneath came the face of a rather handsome man. His eyes were closed, but he wore a rather large grin as he stepped into the doorway. Rias felt fear at the sight of him, as she could feel power radiating off of him, a lot of it, even more than Issei or Surzet's combined. She sat frozen in her chair as the man stood with his shoulders up against the bookcase in the only way out of this small room of bookcases. "Hello, Lady Rias, it has been some now, hasn't it?" the man asked, much to the confusion of Rias, who was confused as to how this man knew her, and how she didn't remember like him at all. The man gained a lightly confused face at the sight of Rias' fearful one. "Oh, Rias, don't worry, I am not here to hurt you. I just wanted to talk to you about my nephew Issei, that's all," the man stated while raising his hands in peaceful gesture. It helped Rias calm herself, but only slightly, as this man kept making her feel more scared for every word he spoke. Even more so that last bit. "Is he Issei's uncle? Then how have I no memory of him?" It took a lot of willpower for her, just to nod and sit in a way to make him feel he was being listened to. She did mostly as she felt he could kill her and everyone here in a heartbeat if he wanted to. Good. Well, since it seems you don't remember me, I guess should reintroduce myself," the man said before he snapped his fingers, making the entire room shake at the sudden release of his power. But this was not the most shocking thing he did, because what he had summoned into his hand was even more terrifying. Black lighting was dancing around his fingertips and jumping onto a few pieces of metal nearby and destroying it completely. Rias knew that only one being could use this kind of magic, which only made her dread the chance that this was said person, and not just some man who had learned to do so too. "My name is Crom Cruech, the Crescent Moon Dragon and uncle to Issei Hyoudou. Pleasure to meet you again after so many years, Rias Gremory." Crom reached out his other hand as the other still held a few glimpses of lighting. Rias reached slowly to shake his hand, as she feared even more now for not only her life but the entirety of the Devil territory. But even more pleasing, why would Crom come all this way just to talk with her, when he could just go and talk with Issei first? She felt his raw strength when he grabbed her hand in his own, almost crushing it as he shook it. She took her hand back in a swift movement, as her instincts were yelling at her to run away or else she would die. But she couldn't, and she knew that, and so did Crom as he made it so. as he had more or less taken both her and her entire home hostage, which made Rias try her best to recollect herself and try to make the most out of this shit of situation. Or at least try to make everyone being kept hostage be able to see another day. What do I owe the pleasures of such a sudden visit from the ultimate evil dragon? Rias nervously asked. Her left hand was clenched so tightly to try to keep her from fainting or seeming weak. It seemed to work as Crom opened his eyes, showing her his two differently colored eyes. One black as the abyss, the other as golden as the wings on Arch Michiel. His smile spread it out into a bigger one, making Rias shiver at the unnatural face expressions he could muster. Oh, do I need a reason to meet my nephew's mate? You're my niece, you know, so I should visit you at least once, right? Crom said, making Rias feel less tense but also slightly worried what this could mean for her. But also bugged her a little that Crom saw Rias as Issei's mate when Issei was nothing above a lover or plaything to Rias, but this was probably not the right time to say that, and more so with this man in front of her. Really? Hee. Then thank you, Uncle MHNP. Rias' mouth was covered by Crom's hand as he slightly squeezed her face. Don't you dare call me that. Do you really think I will let you call me that? Just because I am calling you my niece, don't mean you can call me your uncle. If you were a dragon then maybe, but you're not now, are you, you filthy devil whore? Crom spoke as his sparks of dark lighting flew around him. His razor-sharp teeth were on full display along with his slit eyes. He didn't need to turn into a form similar to Issei's half-human, half-dragonic form to show off his dragonic body. He was a full dragon after all, and one of the strongest ones at that. Now listen here, niece, I will only say this once. I see you as a weakness to my nephew in his future, but because he loves you as much he does, I will let you live. But once he finds someone better or just leaves you, I will personally kill you for toying with his heart. Is that understood? Rias shook her head frantically, as this threat was not one to underestimate, not by any means, as it came from the strongest nun-god dragon alive. Crom let go of her face and let the lighting die out. Good, now tell me where I can find my nephew, was all he asked, to which Rias chose to tell him, which seemed to annoy him as he sighed heavily. He then stomped on the ground, making a stake of black lighting hit him. Once it was gone, so was he, leaving only a burnt floor along with a terrified Rias who just sat in her chair unable to breathe with all that had just happened. She decided to not do anything for the rest of that day, and just sat with her fear slowly disappearing. But like heck she could do that, since it hit her right after that she had put Saji and the dragon near Issei Loctation in danger. Oh, for the love of the Maois, what have I done? Underworld Dragon Territory Tunnels. Alright, see you tomorrow, Saji, and don't slack off just because you're getting an upgrade. Issei spoke, as Saji nodded while holding a backpack and standing on a circle with a dragon crest on it. The circle soon vanished in a bright purple light, along with Saji leaving Issei alone in the tunnels. So what does the son of an evil dragon king do when he dons to have to train a wimp or listen to dumb devils all day? He turns into his true form and sleep at the bottom of a deep hole, with his few treasures surrounding him, which happened to be pictures of Rias and him as kids, with a few leftover piece of some white armor. Thanks to his many years in imprisonment, Issei hadn't really have a chance to make himself a hoard of gold and gems, like many others his age or at his power level, leaving him with personal items and leftover battle trophies. The life of Issei Hyoudou was hard, and he knew that as he felt slight shame that his most precious treasure would be seen as little less than a shameful retelling of the princess and evil dragon story every human child has been told. But even so, this was still 100 times better than trying to sleep with chains all over one's body, and so he could find enough comfort to fall asleep here. He could even snore, which made the surrounding tunnel shake slightly every time he did. This is the life. No chains, no dumb pure blood devils ordering me around, no crows and no Saji. If only every day could be like this. Issei thought as he continued his half-awake sleep through most of his afternoon until he felt someone enter his territory. He could feel them clearly as they walked down his tunnels with little to no shame or try to be stealthy, as he could feel the light vibrations of their footsteps. Well, there goes that afternoon. Now let's see what these guys might be after. Issei thought as he morphed himself into a smaller version of himself before slithering out into the tunnels. With the group of intruders, which was a group of 5 low-ranking devil kids, 2 of them being close to teenage age. 2 of the younger kids had dark hair, one was a girl and the other a boy. The 2 older ones had dark red hair and the other dark blue hair, both were boys. The last one had golden hair and was a girl. Come on now, just a bit longer, I heard a dragon was sleeping down here, the dark blue-haired boy said as he marched onwards with the younger kids following him. The second oldest was behind them all as he wasn't so keen on this whole thing. Are you sure this is okay? I heard from my grandmother that this place is dragon territory. We shouldn't be here, the dark red-haired boy said, but the others chose to ignore him and continued walking down the dark tunnels. The blue-haired kid summoned a flame in his hands as a light source. The younger kids looked on and aware as he was able to do this, something they all still hadn't learned how to do. I know it's pretty hard to do, but if you just train hard enough you can maybe be as strong as I am one day. Ain't that right, Milikas? The the blue-haired kid asked Milikas, who was looking around frantically. Yeah, sure, can we leave now? I don't want to get in trouble with my grandmother again, Milikas said as he stopped the whole group with his worries. The younger kids just looked towards the other older kid, the blue-haired one. He smirked and made himself look bigger just slightly before speaking again. Oh, you scared of your grandmother? Puff, she ain't anything special now, this come on, who cares what she thinks? The blue-haired kid said as he began to walk down the tunnels again. Milikas decided to follow after them, even if he didn't want to and knew his grandmother would scold him, to not even think about what his parents would do. But he also did to protect the other kids, as he was the only one with strong magic in the group. Even if he could only fire 4 or 5 balls of destruction, it would still be enough to hopefully let the others escape. The kids turned another corner, but when they did, they all froze. Milikas didn't, as he didn't feel frightened by this feeling that was hanging in the air. He could feel it was in Dragon's irritation, but it felt familiar to him for some weird reason. Are you guys okay? He asked, hopping slightly. The other kids would turn tail and head home, but unfortunately the blue-haired one was either brave or really dumb. So I see the dragon sees me as a worthy enemy. Come on, we must be close, he yelled as he began to sprint down the tunnel, summoning another flame in his other hand. The other kids stayed behind with Milikas. What should we do, Milikas? I am scared, Milikas. Can we go home now, Milikas? I don't want to follow after Alex anymore, said the younger kids. Milikas tried to calm them down before telling them to head out again and that he would go get Alex. Don't worry, I'll be fine. I am Rias Gremory and I won't let that idiot be harmed, Milikas said as the younger kids looked at him with admiration before he made them all run out of the cave again. Then he himself went deeper into the tunnels, walking slowly and carefully as to further irritate the dragon who lived here. He tried to listen for Alex's footsteps, but he couldn't hear them at all. He could someone watching his every step, almost like the tunnels were alive and were watching him. He wanted to go home to his family, but he couldn't let his friend die or get harmed. Even if he was an idiot, he was still his best friend. Alex, are you there? Milikas called out in a whisper like yell, but he received no answer other than the silence which was being to get to him. He turned around frantically at the smallest sound, which seemed to happen more and more, for every step deeper into the tunnels he went. He stopped dead in his tracks when he felt a wet yet hot sensation touch his feet. He looked down, hoping he wouldn't see piss. Oh, thank the Maoist, but still you, Milikas said as he felt a little bit more calm, as it seemed like this was Alex's piss, which meant he had probably been scared off by the dragon. So then came the next question: where was he? If he really had been scared off by the dragon, then shouldn't he had run into him by now? Gus, I'll have to look in one of the other tunnels, Milikas said as he began his siege again. He began walking back to where he came from, with no idea that the dragon was standing right next to the pool of piss, with an fainted Alex in his hands. Oh, so you're Milikas's friend? Oh, too bad, that don't mean shit to me. Now what to do? Issei thought as began to head back to his lair with Alex in his arms. Issei didn't really notice the smell of piss, as the most noticeable smell was the kid's fear that was just reeking off him. It's a rather sweet smell for most evil races, even more so for ones with a great sense of smell, like dragons. He dropped him on top of a small pile of leather that Saji had made into his bed this week. Now then, I guess it's time for you to wake up, or else I might make you into tonight dinner, Issei said as he flicked Alex's head hard enough to leave a bruise, but also hard enough to make him wake up again. He looked around weakly before noticed Issei, who was in his half-human and dragon form, which obviously made him back away. No, don't kill me, he cried out, waving his hand out in front of him, like it would protect him or something. Issei just sighed before he calmly inhaled and then suddenly made a hole in the wall next to the kid's head. Shut it, devil, he spoke in a cold voice, making Alex freeze from fear of his show of his strength and speed. Good, now tell me what you and your devil friends were doing in a dragon's territory, Issei asked in a bit more friendly tone, but Alex was still too afraid to answer, making him lose his patience, something he had thought he had a lot of as he sat in chains and waited most of his life. Speak now or you'll never see your family again, Issei yelled out, showing off his dangerously sharp teeth, making the area gain a strong acidic smell. It came from Alex's already pissed pants, which just made Issei sigh even more. Issei sat back in a more relaxing way before snapping his fingers, making a few lights light up the room. Alex, being a child, forgot about his dire situation for a brief second, as the many dancing lights were cool to look at. He would have smiled if not for the sight of Issei, sitting in a bit of shade, making him look scary. Don't worry, kid, I just want to know why you would come in here, then you can go. Okay, I promise, Issei said, flashing a friendly smile at Alex, who, while still being scared, gathered a small bit of courage to speak. Me and my friends came here to see a sleeping dragon. I ran ahead to fight it, but you scared me and so I. Alex mumbled on about being scared and stuff. Issei sat and listened to the small bits he could get before sighing at the reasoning and such. You really came here to see a dragon sleeping. Are you that dumb? I mean, really, are you that dead set on dying an early death? Didn't your parents tell you to never approach a sleeping dragon? Issei said in an angry voice as he began to scold Alex for his stupid behavior, which Alex rather maturely expected. I know, I didn't mean for the others to be harmed or anything. I just wanted to look cool in front of them. You know, Alex said as he tried to hide behind his legs. Issei just sighed again as he now remembered why he hated kids. They're all stupid, even more than prideful old fools, he thought before standing up and reaching a hand out to Alex. I understand, kid, now let's get you out of here. Issei spoke as he reached a hand out to Alex, who took it hesitantly before standing up himself and following after Issei. Alex looked up to see Issei's face as he thought that even though he was scary to be with, he looked really cool. But he didn't see the cool face, instead he just saw Issei looking at him with scary grin. But before we get you of here, I'll need you to do something for me, Alex. Time skip. Milikas and the other kids stood outside, waiting for Alex to come. Vritra had come as well, as she had to bring the kids back home and scold Milikas for going into dragon territory. They had waited for half an hour with no sign of Alex coming out. Vritra wanted to go inside and find the kid, but she needed to bring the other ones back first, but she couldn't just leave if it did happen to come out while she was not there. Mother, do you think Alex is okay? Milikas asked. He even held onto her hand with a tight grip, making his worries obvious to Vritra. She bent a bit down so that she could pat his head in a reassuring way. I am sure he will be fine, he's probably just lost in there. But let's hope one of the dragons who live here, Alex. Vritra and the others notice in the light parts of the tunnels, a young boy walking out with wounds all over his body. Vritra began to rush over to check on him, until she saw that he was holding someone's hand in his left hand. She chose to stand between the kids and this unknown man, as she couldn't see who he was thanks to him walking in darker parts of the tunnels. Who are you? What happened to that boy? Vritra asked as she released a bit of her magic just to get the point across. The man just chuckled lightly, still walking with Alex's hand in his own. When he spoke, he shocked Vritra and made Milikas happy. Geez, Vritra, I saved one of Milikas's friends and the first thing you do is threaten me. Issei spoke as he came out with Alex next to him. Vritra was happily surprised by him being here, but changed her focus when she noticed how injured Alex was. He was shaking as walking all the way out had been more than he could right now. She rushed over and took him in her arms, looking over part of him worriedly. Alex, are you okay? She asked frantically, receiving a weak nod from Alex, who began to cry and hug her tightly as his tear began to flow down in streams. Vritra, I was so scared, a dragon attacked me, he hurt me, but Issei saved me, he came and beat the dragon. Alex spoke weakly while Vritra was trying to comfort him. Issei just stood back, looking mildly bored as he didn't really care about this whole thing. Vritra looked over towards him, making him switch the expression from bored to a more relaxed look. Thank you, Issei, thank you for helping him. I hope he didn't cause too much trouble for you. Vritra said while bowing with head, which Issei did back. It was nothing, I just happened to be stationed here for the whole training thing with Saji. But I hope you kids have learned something. Don't go near the dragon territory or other kind. Issei looked briefly at Alex, who cowered away from his gaze. Won't always be nearby when you go into our territory, so let this be a lesson to you all, Issei said with a serious tone. All of the kids nodded before Vritra took them all back to the Gremory territory. Chapter 12, End of Training. Underworld Gremory Territory. I hope we can become great friends, Akino-chan. Akino sprung up from her bed, sweat flying off her as she did. She tried to calm herself with deep breaths, even putting a hand over her heart as the beating pain had begun to set in. It seemed to work slightly as her breathing became more controlled and her heart calmed down little by little. She took a few more calming breaths before she looked at the room she was in, scanning for anything or anyone. The room was dark, the only light being that of the artificial moon's light shining in, leaving small spots of light on the floor. She looked carefully at her room, noticing nothing that shouldn't be here. She stood up a short bit after, just to make herself feel totally safe. She went over to the little kitchen room, looked inside while staying in the open doorway. Nothing, only the light sound of the refrigerator could be heard. She then headed over to the bathroom, but before she opened the door, she noticed that the lights were on inside of the bathroom. She wouldn't have noticed if not for her feet stepping on something wet, as when she had looked down she could see a small wave of light under the door. She put up her guard as she prepared a silent ice spell. She reached for the doorknob and after taking a few quick breaths opened up the door and pointed her hand with the spell on towards the room. There was no one inside. The light had been on because she had forgot to turn it off. She shut the door and went over to her bed again, picking up her watch on her nightstand to check the time. It was a little over midnight, just like the times before. She sighed heavily before lying down on her bed again as she was going to try to get at least a bit more sleep. This had become a part of her routine as the days of the training camp had passed. always the same nightmare, and it would always get longer for each night, and she would always wake up at midnight. Needless to say, she doesn't get much sleep these days, at least not in the underworld. Dragon territory, underground tunnels. Below the cold and hard rocky terrain that was most of the dragon territory, in the tunnels of old devil mining operations, a blue circle had appeared. It had the Citri family crest on it, but with few differences, making it the teleportation circle of servant or peerage member. And it was a peerage member, namely Saji, pawn of Sona Citri, who appeared out of the blue light with a bag over his left shoulder. He looked around the tunnel, a small smile on his face, as he had missed this place, even if he had almost been killed while training with Issei. But now he was back and had gotten a few upgrades from Azazel. He hadn't gotten used to them yet, but he could definitely feel that he was stronger, even if it was only a little bit more than before. Though he knew that he would become even stronger, as Azazel had told him the next part of his training with Issei was going to be him mastering his new gained strength. Speaking of Issei, where was he? Saji had kinda hoped he would be standing here and waiting for him, or at least had been nearby or left a note, or is that a statue? Of Rias. Saji was stunned as he locked his eyes on a rather nice statue of Rias, and even more when he noticed that she wasn't made of sandstone, she was just naked. The curves of her body, her firm yet still soft-looking breast, and her poo. Nope, I know this is a trap, so just come out already, Issei. Saji yelled, blushing slightly for letting his guard down. But he still received no sign that Issei was there. He felt like he was alone, well, at least physically alone. He let down his bag and began to walk down the tunnels, trying to search for Issei with his more sensitive sense. But much like the name suggests, they are more sensitive, and Saji hasn't had time to get used to them yet. He suddenly felt a major urge to gag, maybe even throw up. He didn't know why, but it just came over him as he passed down a corner of the tunnels. Then he found why just as he turned the corner. His foot had hit a thick type of liquid. He didn't know 100% what it was, but he could tell just by the smell that it had a lot of iron in it. He reached a hand down, touching the liquid slightly before taking his dirtied hand up and looking at it. He wanted to gag. He wished he hadn't looked more into it. It was blood, and a lot of it as far as he could smell, and it only seemed to get worse further down the tunnel. He stood still, almost frozen in place. Questioned why there was blood here and whose blood it was, and did Issei have something to do with it? Had Issei been attacked, or had he attacked someone? He felt a slight push of some sort, not by someone but by his mind, by his instincts. He felt a need to go further and find the source of all this blood. With slow and weak steps, Saji began to walk down the tunnel, walking on the left side of the blood. He could feel that he was reaching the source that this thing inside him wanted him to reach. He didn't feel he was in control, but more like an observer. He passed down another corner, and as he did, he was hit with this new and much stronger smell. Rot, decay, meat. Saji began to try and take some form of control again. He tried to walk away and forget this, maybe even hope that Issei would tell him what had happened. That it was some monster that he killed, or it was someone he had tried to save from a monster. Just something else than whatever this thing inside of him wanted to see. He felt his slowly being pulled towards the tunnel and down towards the source of the blood and this slowly intoxicating smell of meat. His body didn't listen to him, like he was just a soul stuck inside of it. He began to walk in the blood, it slapsing to the sides and drenching his shoes and pants. What in the name of the original Satans is this? He reached a cave where he saw a hill of bodies. His body had stopped. Saji could feel he was slowly gaining back control, but how was that going to help now? His legs suddenly gave out and he sat on his knees. The blood being deep here began to drench all of his pants and now his shirt too. He didn't care about that, he just wanted to know what he was looking at here. He counted the bodies, something he wished he hadn't, as it seemed to be well over 10 people, maybe even 20. He was stunned at this, but he was even sickened by this. Even more so when his eyes adjusted to the dark and he began to see faces of younger people, some who were old and even one who looked like a child. But that was only the tip of the iceberg, as he also saw their maimed bodies, their missing limbs, and some even lost their heads. He was completely stunned at the sight, so much so that he didn't hear footsteps approaching him from behind. They stopped only a short distance from him. "You found your legacy, kid. It's less fucked up than I had expected." The person behind him spoke. It sounded old and had a powerful tone to it, like it could make any person bow to them, like a king. Saji was still locked in place, but he heard what the man had told him. "Wah, what do you mean my legacy?" Saji asked, horrified at the idea of this being his doing in some way or form. The older man just hummed a bit before walking closer to him, stopping on the side of Saji. Saji became scared of the newfound closeness, but also curious of the person next to him. He could only see he wore shoes, had dark skin, and wore a black cape with purple or yellow lines on it. "I mean that you, Saji Genshiro, will one day leave behind this as part of your story. This will be the thing people will remember you for, another power-hungry dragon-type sacred gear host." The old man spoke before he began to hum again in a weird, almost Phrygian tone, with a few words that Saji didn't know. Saji began to think about what he said, that this was the thing people would remember him for. "Why?" he asked softly but loud enough for the old man to stop humming and give an answer. because that is the fate of those who are chosen as hosts for a sealed dragon soul. But be glad this is the smallest pill in history, at least for my hosts," the old man said before continuing to hum his song. Saji would have asked another question, but the last bit he said hit him hard. This old man was not just some ghost or whatever, he was Vritra. Saji looked up to his side, his face morphing into a shocked expression as he made eye contact with Vritra. This was Vritra, the evil dragon king and one of the only dragons who had been sealed into sacred gears. Saji, while admiring or being horrified, he didn't really know anymore, started to notice something about him. He looked an awful lot like Issei. He was only taller and more mature in his facial features. This starring of his didn't go unnoticed as Vritra smirks with pride, something that Saji also thought looked like Issei. "Oh, you are an interesting host indeed, and you obviously know when you see a handsome man, but don't be a kiss-ass, I hate people like that," Vritra said, making Saji quickly look away. He didn't really know what else to look at as he could only look at the future of his legacy. Where was it? The pill of bodies, the blood, it was all gone. Saji looked to his side, expecting Vritra to also be gone, but he was still there. "Vritra, what is happening? Where was the hill?" "Saji, where are you just talking with Vritra?" Issei asked, the now even more confused Saji as he looked back at him, now seeing the younger version of Vritra standing in his place. What is going on?" Saji asked himself out loud, which made Issei look confused. "Well, I think you just got your first meeting with your partner. Congrats, it seems to not have been as bad as I heard it would be, as he always does something like showing them their future. But don't worry, it's only a possible outcome," Issei said, trying to comfort Saji, who felt a bit better after hearing that, but he still couldn't really shake away that image from his head. It was going to haunt him for a long time, and he had a feeling that wasn't going to be the only time he would see stuff like this. But at least he knew that it wasn't a preset way for him, that it wasn't his fate. It was only a possible future, and if he didn't want it, then he would have to become stronger so he can choose his own legacy. Thank Offeyes he didn't notice that I made feel less dread, or else he would question his own morals. Well, I hope he is ready for the next 3 weeks, Issei thought. Big time skip, Underworld Dragon Territory. The dawn of the last day of Azazel's training camp had come, and with it came a bunch of relief and happy cries from the many victims of Azazel's training methods. Even more so from Saji, as he could finally go outside the tunnels again, after being stuck there for over half a month with Issei. He wouldn't say it was all bad, as he did get stronger, faster, and much better at using his sacred gear. He even got upgraded, so that he now had all the pieces of Vritra's sacred gear, thanks to Azazel. It had been tough at times, sometimes even life-threatening, but he had survived every step and gotten stronger from it. So when he woke up that morning, he wasn't filled with the slight fear of what Issei would make him do, but instead with excitement over what Sona would say about his progress. He even hoped Issei would say something nice about him, like he did a few weeks back. He didn't know why, but he got very happy whenever Issei would speak well of his training. He thought it was probably something like, "That bit of him that is a dragon is happy that he, a stronger dragon, is speaking well of him." He didn't think too much about it, but he wanted to hear him say something like that about him again. "Aren't you in love with that Citri girl?" asked Vritra, through the mental connection that he and Saji had recently opened between each other. Saji blushed at this, as he didn't know that the host of the dragon or spirit can't hide their emotions and such from said spirit or dragon. "Yeah, I mean just a little, what's it to you?" he asked, still blushing a bit at his obvious crush for Sona. "It's just that I thought by how you see my hatchling that you were in love with him. Guess I was wrong," Vritra said. If Saji could see him, then he would see a giant snake shrugging. Saji just began to blush even more than before. How could Vritra just something like it was nothing, and what did he mean? It seemed like Saji was maybe in love with Issei. These were thoughts that were going through Saji's head, something Vritra looked in on and found amusing to see his host panic over. "Why do you think that? Just because he looks good doesn't mean I like him. I just respect him for being strong." "Yeah, that's it," Saji answered back, hopping that shut Vritra up. "It didn't." "Oh really? Then why was one of the first things you were thinking when you woke up him?" "I know my hatchling looks good, but I don't think that's what has taken your interest in him." Vritra spoke, making Saji quiet as Vritra's words carried a bit of insight he couldn't deny. Saji wouldn't disagree that he had an interest in Issei, but with Vritra's little insight, or at least his words, it made him think about what kind of interest he had. Was it just friendship? Was it maybe a desire to be as strong as him? A desire to help him with his own demons? Or did he maybe like him a bit more than just a friend? "Maybe you got a point there. I haven't really thought about it. Not now, young one. He is coming. Act normal. We'll discuss this later." Vritra interrupted, as Saji could now hear Issei's footsteps creeping closer before he stood at the front of the tunnel Saji had turned into his sleeping spot. "Good morning, Saji. Are you ready to get back to a normal bed? Because I sure am. Sleeping on rocks for a month has made my back sore." Issei spoke as he came fully around the corner, carrying a big bag full of metal stuff, judging by the sound coming from it. Saji sat there for a minute before he woke up fully and stood up. Yes, I am ready to sleep in a normal bed again." "And Issei," Saji said with a bit of blush. Issei just looked at him confused, though with his slitted eyes it just made him look angry. "Yes, Saji, what is it?" he asked coarsely, his tone being friendly enough, but his eyes still looked like he wanted to kill. Saji glooped before bowing deeply. I just wanted to thank you for training me and for teaching me about what I can really do. Thank you, Issei, Saji said in the most respectful tone he could muster. Issei was taken a bit aback. After a bit of no one saying anything, Saji looked up to see Issei hiding his face behind his left hand. Issei, you okay? Saji asked, concerned that he might have done something to upset him. At least he was until he saw Issei's face, which held a cocky smirk. He gulped just from fear of what this meant. Oh, so you're thankful. Don't be, I did this for myself, you were just a byproduct. Issei said, though his voice wasn't cold or unfriendly, it was just as before. Saji had been with Issei for a long time now, and had learned that Issei just acts this way and doesn't let people see him as being weak. He knew that this was pretty much the closest he would get to a "you did great, so be proud of yourself" he was going to get from Issei. You may say that, but I know you helped me more than you needed to some of the time, so don't act like you didn't care. Saji said back with a less than cocky smirk, but of a friendly one. Issei just waved his left hand as he turned around and began walking down the tunnel. Whatever you say, anyways, are you coming or what? We have to be back at 12 or else we'll be late for Azazel's gift, Issei said, but with a hidden smirk. Saji looked at his wristwatch, seeing the clock was already 11:23. He picked up his bags and ran up to the side of Issei. Do you know what he will give us? Saji asked. Oh, it's something good, trust me on that. Issei answered back, still hiding his smirk. Small time skip, Underworld Gremory territory. Good job, everyone. Your hard work and sore bodies have now all been rewarded as you have become stronger, some more so than I had imagined. Azazel said as he had knowing smirk, the same one Issei had, though none of the others really noticed or chose not to connect. So as a reward, besides the party held for the Devil Heirs youth tomorrow, I will now give you the greatest gift I can grant you all, Azazel said as he slowly raised his left hand. They all looked at it, curious as to what would happen when and what he would give them. Hopefully it's Phoenix Tears or maybe a book on sacred gears, Rias said to Sona, who nodded, agreeing with her idea. Yes, either of those two would be nice and most definitely useful, Sona answered back. Azazel's hand stopped, then opened up as it was the robotic arm he had gotten after his fight with Kateria Leviathan. In the airspace between the many split parts of that was his arm. A mirror of sorts had taken place. All of them looked curiously at it and wondered what it meant. Then they began to notice it held the image of someone in it. A giant black snake, with golden and purple lines going down its body and with two massive purple eyes staring right at them. They all realized what this meant. Even more so did Saji, as he had seen those eyes a lot more than he would like to admit. It was Issei in his true form. Rias and Sona knew based on the golden lines, this was his truest form, where he, after hellish training and a lot of negotiating with D-Drake, had been able to add his boost ability to this form, thus making it the strongest form he can take. This form alone can make him, with at least 60 or so more years, he could become the third heavenly dragon, as he is already the third or second dragon king alone with this form. This is your reward, kids. Hope you'll enjoy your fight with a Dragon King level dragon at full power, Azazel said as he closed his arm and walked off the little pedestal he had been standing on before. All of them turned back towards the now transformed Issei. He was watching them all with his slitted eyes. They could hear his slow and relaxed breathing. They could even sometimes see small clouds of steam come out from his snout. He was huge, at least 3 times bigger than when they fought after the train fake-out a month ago. They could see his power radiating off him, as his aura had almost become visible to the naked eye. He was much stronger than them, and they knew it, but he didn't know how strong they had gotten either. Rias and Sona stepped forward, pride in each of their steps as they too began to let out their power, a sign specific to dragons that says they are willing to fight them. Rias Gremory, heiress of the Gremory clan, Changeling you, Dragon King Issei Hijishiki, to a fight with mine and Sona Citri's peerage against you, Rias declared, her voice sounding off with pride as she felt she and the others could take him on and maybe win. The others behind the two kings summoned their weapons, sacred gears and battle cloths, showing that they were ready to fight. We got you, Rias/Sona-sama, they all shouted behind them as they all stood in position and were ready to fight. Issei began to move his head up higher towards the sky, slowly lifting the rest of his body as he went, showing off his full 125 meters length. Then the end of his tail too was no longer on the ground, and he was now flying, much like a Chinese dragon. I accept your challenge, devils, as my pride as a dragon and the son of a dragon king is on the line. Now get ready, for I will not go easy on you anymore, Rias. Issei roared as in a swift motion he began to launch himself towards the group, thus beginning the battle and the final tests Azazel had planned. Azazel only saw parts of it start before he flew a few hundred meters away, to make distance, as he knew Issei was going to create some havoc. Chapter 13, Last Test. The Underworld Gremory territory. Fire! Yelled Sona as many different ice, fire and wind magics were thrown at the now gigantic-sized snake that was Issei's true form. They had been fighting for little less than 2 minutes, and Issei had still yet to attack since he flew towards them and destroyed an old pre-Devil Civil War tower. The attacks all hit him, but it didn't do jack shit, as Issei scales this was much tougher this time. The many attacks had though maybe not damaged him, but had made a cloud of smoke around him, letting the two devil peerages to prepare an attack with all of their knights and rooks. A plan made by using Rias' brute force tactics and Sona's more detailed planning abilities. In a swift motion, Kiba, Zenovia, Kaneko, Meguri, Yura, and Saji all launched towards Issei at the fastest speeds they could. Kiba and Zenovia held their swords towards each other as they prepared for a combined slash attack, with Kaneko cocking back her fist to hit the hopefully wounded area. The two both slashed with all the strength they had, but it left a dent in his scales, and Kaneko could only make said dent a millimeter deeper, making it at most 2 millimeters deep. Saji, Yura, and Meguri tried something similar, but with Saji as the big hitter instead of Yura. A heavy overhead slash from Meguri with her samurai sword, which left a deeper dent than the other group had made. Yura then used as much of her strength as she could in left arm and made the dent become an almost tiny hole. Saji felt this was it and powered up as much power as he could before sending his fist flying towards the target. He felt it contact, and it felt strong, really strong. He could the scale giving in and making him feel a bit of the soft skin underneath it. When the two different attacks had been done, the cloud of smoke was still up. The two groups landed next to their own kings, but the mood on their faces was all different. The orc group was a little saddened that they couldn't even inflict a real wound on Issei, while the Citri group was cheering that they hit through his armor. Even more so was Saji as he yelled out, "I finally got him, I fucking wounded Issei Hyoudou." He yelled out, his pride obvious and justified, as this was a big thing for these two peerages. Unfortunately for the preteens, their joy and pride over this small success was short-lived. Out of the smoke cloud came Issei's full head with his mouth open wide and ready to swallow them up. They all managed to dodge out of the way, but not without some eye-to-eye contact with his giant slitted eyes. He bit down on a small hill of stones, then turned around towards the orc and slithering towards them, spitting medium-sized rocks at them as he went. Luckily Akino, Rias, and Asia could easily fly out of the way, but Gasper, Kiba, Zenovia, and Kaneko weren't so lucky and had to run, or else they would be hit by the flying rocks. Sona and her peerage tried to help by firing magic at Issei, but it did no more than make more clouds of smoke and dust. It also made them not see the end of his giant tail swipe towards them, sending them all flying into the ruins of the old tower. Damn it, why is he so tough? I thought for sure we would have been able to hinder him a bit with that attack, Akino said as the others looked over the chaos that was this test battlefield, with Issei covering at least a fourth of it. I don't know, but it seems his scales are much tougher than when Sona fought him last time, Rias said before aiming her arms at Issei and began to charge a ball of destruction towards him. Will that even work? If none of our other magic, it has two, and it always does. His leash made use of this power, so it must be able to hurt him, Rias said back, stopping Akino. Rias fired off her power of destruction towards Issei's head. Lucky for her, he was focused on her other peerage members. Unlucky for her, they had been hurt by his attacks. Her ball of destruction hit him cleanly on the head, leading to what sounded like a roar coming from him. Yes, Bullseye, I told you it would work, Rias said, feeling a little bit more at ease now that she knew she could still do some damage to him. She and her two servants were then met up with Sona and her half-bruised peerage. Oh my Satan, Sona, are you okay? Asia, help them, hurry. Rias spoke. Asia nodded and started to heal them, though it was quite hard seeing as they were still flying in the air. I am fine, but that single attack he landed on us was really strong. He isn't the same Issei we played with when we were younger, Rias. He is a dragon now. Sona spoke with a sense of seriousness to her, something that Rias could see, as this was not how she had expected this to go. He was many times stronger than she remembered, and all this along with last month's worth of surprises, it was starting to get weird for her. First Azazel's Prezail, then that monster, and now Issei's unknown strength being shown off. Why are all these things happening? Rias wondered, but she did get to muse on this thought before Akino pushed her out of the way of a giant spiraling purple flame. They crashed and landed on the ground below. Saji was the first to stand up and began to help his team up. Rias was helped up by Akino a bit after. They went to see how bad the damage was, but saw that only they and Sona, Saji, Tsubaki, and Momo were still standing. Asia had been roasted and taken away with the same kind of magic as they would use at a raiding game. Rias also saw green particles flying up from the ground from where Kiba, Zenovia, Gasper, and Kaneko used to be. He defeated them all so easily. Tsubaki started at Issei's show of power. She and most of the girls were all frightened, even more so when they saw him slowly slithering towards them, his two giant purple eyes staring them down as he came closer and closer. Rias, Sona, Akino, and Saji were not as affected. The two first because they knew and had seen how strong he was, though they were quite shocked at how strong he had become. Akino was also shocked, but also angry, as she firmly believed he was behind her nightmares, along with killing her mother. It was enough of a drive to not buckle under, even if she really wanted to at this point. Saji was scared, very scared, but he was also admiring Issei Montrus' strength. He felt weird, to say the least. On one hand, he was afraid that Issei would use this strength against him, and on the other, he wanted to try and fight this strength of his. Rias, what do we do? Aquino asked, her slight anger evident but also her fear of having to continue fighting him. Rias stepped forward slowly, stopping only when she stood at the front of the group, her face looking forward. We fight or else we lose completely. Issei doesn't care if you're scared, if you're weak, if you're unable to fight. He only cares if he can fight you or not, so stop being afraid and meet him face to face, Rias said, though her words were not very convincing. She too sounded scared, her usual pride and friendliness gone. She closed her eyes as the thought of losing was scary, as it would mean she no longer had control over him, that he was too strong. She knew he would never leave, but would she still be in control if he won? She didn't have time to ponder on these questions as she could feel his breath hit her face. She opened her eyes to be met with his own purple ones. Rias, surrender now while I still feel like it, he said, his voice sounding bored and unimpressed. He was unimpressed. The only thing that he thought deserved some credit was Saji's punch, but that was it. Rias just used her powers as she knew they would work, or at least thought they worked. Sure, they work on him, but not in his current state. Normally they're unbearable, but now they just hurt a bit. Never, on my name as the Gremory Araceris, I will defeat Yo. Before the last could even be said, Rias was flung to the other side of the group by a strong gust of wind from Issei. He had blown a single time out of his snout. Give up now or else you will only lose more of your dignity than you already have, Issei said, enjoying the defeated faces of the people in front of him. Though one of them still had the face of a fighter, Saji. So my own purple can still stand and fight, I expected nothing less. Let's see what you do if I do this, Issei thought, before his body began to release a form of mist from it. Then out of said mist came Issei in his half-dragonic and half-humanoid form. He spread out his arms in an almost welcoming manner and was about to speak, when he saw a crimson red star fly towards him. He barely got a word out before he was sent a meter or two back. He looked around him, not really understanding what had hit him, before he began to feel an unmistakable pain. He cried out in pain as he felt the damage of the attack begin to affect his body. The people still standing watched as Issei cried out in pain as the star-shaped wound on his chest. It wasn't very deep, but it had made him bleed a little bit. Sona wanted to make an attack now with the remaining people here, but before she could get a word out, Aquino and Saji had already attacked. Aquino began to summon as much holy lighting as she could, while Saji ran in with all of his sacred gear pieces on and just went to town with Issei's wounded body. Left strick, high knee, left swing, double-handed overhammer slam and knock-back kicks. All the while that was happening, Rias had managed to crawl out off the wall she had been shot into. Did it work? She asked Sona, who was still fully understanding what she was seeing. I think so, but I can't believe you had that kind of attack, or how we have turned a sure loss into a possible win, Sona said as she went over to Rias' side and supported her by holding an arm under her to keep her standing. Yeah, me neither, but don't let your guard down yet. Begin attacking before he gets a chance to counter-attack, Rias said, to which Tsubaki and Momo finally woke up from their daze and began to fire magic at Issei from the sides. The many attacks, strikes and magical and elemental attacks began to work, and it showed as Issei didn't have a chance to regain his footing or a chance to breathe. He was under a constant bombardment of attacks, and it began to lead him to losing. He was in shock at how this had happened. He knew why he was losing, but he still couldn't fully understand it. Rias had an attack that was more powerful than just the base normal power of destruction he had been wiped by in the past. So powerful, in fact, he was sure it could even hurt him in his true form, and a lot too. He was happy that his instinct screamed at him to grow scales on his chest as fast as it had, or else he would have had a much bigger hole in his body to take care of. These things combined made him admire his mate, but it also drove him mad as all heck, as he, a dragon and son of one of the strongest of his race, was right now no more than punching bag. And worst of all, a punching bag to devils of all races. The one-race dragons have a long and violent history with, even more than the newer inhabited races who have moved to the underworld in the past. This single fact made him angry, mad, and it made his pride of his race demand him to do something about it. But how was he going to that when he was the one on the receiving end? He couldn't fight back as he didn't get a chance to. He had taught Saji to never let an opponent have a chance to rest or catch their breath, as it could lead to one's own defeat. He knew Sona would use everything in her arsenal to stop him from dodging out of Saji's attacks or retreat at all. And he knew that whatever Aquino was cooking up was going to hurt almost as much as that crimson star Rias fired at him earlier. And Rias had that star, and he didn't know if she could use it more than that time. What should I do? I can't fight back. I am going to lose at this rate. Unless another punch from Saji landed clean on the side of his head, making him fall over and landing on the ground with a hard bump. Aquino now, Rias shouted, her voice almost trembling with anticipation at the thought of betting Issei when he had been at his strongest. Yes, Rias-sama, taste the holy lighting I gained from my father, Vritra. Aquino shouted as the crackling sound of thunder and lightning began to dive at Issei. Though the only thing Issei heard from that whole sentence was not the mention of a very Lephite element known as holy lightning, nor her lessened hate of her own father, but the use of his real name, the name he was given by the being he saw as no more than a mindless monster. And saying that name was the only and most hated thing he ever got from him, as it meant, at least to all who heard, that he was the son of Vritra. Before the lightning hit, his aura spiked as he roared out to her. Akano Hime. The lightning drowned him out, and soon all sight of him was gone, as well as only giant stakes of lightning could be seen dancing in air. Rias, Sona, Tsubaki, and Momo all breathed a sigh of relief as the fight and test was finally over. Akino looked at her handiwork with pride as she crossed her arms, feeling good about herself. But Saji didn't. He was standing by with his guard still up, as he had learned through his tough few, but long felt weeks with Issei, that the one thing you don't do is call him by that name. No matter what you do, never call him that name, as it will have a terrible outcome than most can foresee. Even if it doesn't show like in his fight with Volley, it still makes him mad and makes him act outside of the rules he normally has. Even if he is a wild card most of the time, he still has some rules, those mainly being him showing off. And like he had feared, it came to pass. In a single moment he felt a punch of steel hit his chest. It would have killed him if not for the magic Azazel had put in place for this test. The others all stood silently and watched as out of the dust and through the green particles that used to be Saji came a fully scaled Issei. His hair was long, longer than Akino's, with purple and black strands making up most of it. His eyes glowed like crystals in the dark, but instead of a happy and nice purple, it was a sinister one instead. His arms and legs were longer and had a more beast-like build than before. His hands no longer had fingers, but instead claws that were all sharper than most swords and much stronger than any hammer. His tail was swaying behind him in a calm manner, its many spikes down it moving a bit too, as if they were no more than feathers. And the very end of it, a spearhead, but much, much deadly. This was what they thought they had to fight in the beginning, a human-sized monster with dragon-like strength and power. Not the gigantic snake that was his true form, which had powers they couldn't even hope to fight against. But now that said form stood before them, they were not feeling confident and sure of themselves. They felt fear, and a truly great fear at that. Here stood a member, even if lesser than his peers, of the strongest races of all time. A race no culture, faction, mythology, nor being has been able to fight or win against without great loss. There is always a dragon, and it is always at the top, even if the prideful gods deny its strength, even if the eidotic humans deny its existence, even if world-ending beings think them lesser. They will always stand on top, as they hold true and unmatchable power, and they have just made one of said beings very, very mad. Luckily, before he could ever do any real damage, he fell over from all of the holy lightning he had been hit by earlier. He was still a devil after all, even if only by a small bit. Time skip. Underworld Gremory Mansion. Rias Gremory, along with her one remaining peerage member, teleported into the entrance hall of the Gremory Mansion. Azazel, Surzech, and her parents all stood there waiting for them, and they had a face of both joy over them beating the final test, but also sadness that it might have gone too far. Issei had been very close to killing each of them, at least at the end where he went slightly mad. An uncomfortable silence lay in the grand hall. The only thing that could be heard was the slow breathing of the many powerful beings, a small winces from the two younger women from their bruises and wounds they suffered. Azazel was the first to speak, hopping to congratulate them and make an attempt to say he was sorry, as he had not imagined Issei would go mad at the end of the battle. Great job, kids, you beat one of the strongest dragons. No, never mind that, you passed your test and have now been relieved of my training for the time being. Azazel tried to sound somewhat joyous, but it didn't help much with mood or on the two last standing members of Rias Gremory's peerage. He stroked his goat and began to speak again in a more humble manner. I am sorry that I put you kids through that. I had hoped Issei wouldn't go that far. I am sorry, I take responsibility. He bowed to them. They both seemed shocked by his actions. The same went for the rest of the currently present Gremory family. He slowly stood up straight again, looking serious and not his normal smug face. Rias stepped forward as she finally felt she could talk again. She felt that her parents or Azazel were disappointed in her, since she basically lost, or at least that's how it was meant to be. It's okay. We're okay, and I thank you for putting up that magic around the area we fought in. If you hadn't, then we would have been in real trouble. Rias spoke back, bowing as well. Akino did the same, but was less respectful about it. The moment was short-lived, as down the hall the sound of angry hissing and light footsteps could be heard nearing the entrance hall, then getting closer and closer until it seemingly went down a different hallway instead of through the door to where everyone else was sort of waiting. What was that? Asked Rias, her sense still not being fully working yet, making her not really able to tell who those two were, though she had an idea to who it could be. I asked Grafia to take Issei down to his room for the rest of the summer, seeing as Azazel's idea has, even though not officially, backfired and ended with you and your peerage getting hurt. Surzech said, though sounding a bit unhappy about this outcome, as he and the rest of the family saw Issei as an adoptive member. It pained them to see him being locked up and to punish him, but they had to do it or else he would be unruly and of course create more problems. I understand, brother. I mean Lord Lucifer-sama. May I and Akino go and see my peerage? Rias asked, her voice playing a sad and hurt tone to fool the others from her inner voice, which was happy that she won in the end, even if it didn't really feel like it. Surzech only nodded, moving to the side as he still had some business to discuss with Azazel. Rias, Akino and Rias' parents walked by him and out the double doors and down the hallway towards the medical wing of the mansion. Only Surzech and Azazel were left behind in the room. The mood was evidently bad, as both of these great men had not foreseen this outcome. They had both expected Issei to win and only do enough damage to knock them out. But that attack on Saji would have been an instant death if not for Azazel's quick reaction, and pulling him out just before his body took the true damage behind Issei's punch. What happened out there, Azazel? I thought you said he was able to do this and not cause this kind of mess. Surzech asked. His friendly tone was gone, and in its place was the voice of an angry older brother. Azazel could already tell where this was going, and knew he couldn't talk himself out of this with a new promise or deal like before. He had made a deal with Surzech, or rather the lord and lady of the Gremory household, to try having Issei out of his chains and prison for longer periods of time. Surzech had agreed to it, after his parents had talked it over with him. Azazel would put him to use as a training instructor for Saji, and place him underground far away from devil or dragon living settlements, so that if he did go on a rampage he wouldn't hurt too many. And if everything worked out, then he could spend more of his time outside of his prison with his adoptive family, something Surzech, Rias and their parents wanted. It was a perfect deal for all parties, but Surzech had to make one condition, as he knew what Issei could do. If he went too far just once, the deal was off. I don't know, Surzech, he had behaved himself, followed the rules you and I made for this deal, and didn't hurt anyone more than he needed to. But it seems that he wasn't ready to let go of his hatred of his father, seeing as that probably led to this whole mess we're in now. Azazel answered, looking away to avoid eye contact, and also to think on what he heard and saw through his monitor. Surzech sighed heavily before speaking. I see, well I guess I can't fault you for not knowing how deep his hatred goes. Azazel looked back at Surzech with confusion. He thought he did know, it was pretty obvious to anyone who spent more than a day with him. I don't follow what you're saying, I have seen how deep this hatred of his goes and I just saw another show of it. Azazel answered back, only to earn a sad chuckle from Surzech, who began to walk into the middle of the huge room, stopping when he reached the middle of it, standing right below a beautiful chandelier made of gold and rubies. No you don't, Azazel, not fully at least. What you have seen is only the part he shows off when he is consumed by his anger, which happens too easily, sadly. No, his real hatred stems from his name, his birth name, and what it means to him and all around him. Surzech said as he reached up with his left hand. He opened it slowly, in turn it began to form a crimson ball in the air between his fingers. You see, much like how me and my family are seen as the Gremory thanks to our crimson hair, he is seen as the son of Vritra thanks to his birth name, as his name means this in New Dragonic as well in Satan's tongue. He uses a different name to hide this from the world, and he uses a different last name to hide his connection to us. Surzech spoke. The ball in his hand began to form itself into the shape of a young man. He hides himself away from these things as on one hand, he sees his connection to us as bad for us, and on the other hand he hates to be seen as no more than the son of Vritra, for reasons my family and I have still yet to discover to this day. Surzech explained. The young man of Grimson that used to be a ball had now turned into a small replica of Issei himself. Surzech smiled friendly at the form of him, the form smiling back at him. Azazel was a bit stunned to hear all this. He thought he hated Vritra for other reasons, or because people just saw him as another Vritra, and that he even chose to throw away or at least hide his real name. He had felt this way at one point when he had been cast out. He wanted to throw away his last name but took it back the day his own dad died. He is quite like Rias in that way, wanting people to see him as someone instead of a part of something. Surzech said before closing his hand again, making the small Issei disappear. Surzech looked back towards Azazel, who had his head for the first time in a long time, not thinking about anything. I see this little history lesson was too much for you, old man, hee. But I felt you needed to know it, since you will no doubt try to bring him out of his current and almost endless prison that is his past. Surzech said before beginning to walk out of the room, holding still a much friendly smile than before the conversation started. When he closed the door behind him, Azazel finally woke up from his stunned state. He looked around the room, noticing a red glow come from the chandelier above him. In one of the rubies, the biggest of them all, stood the form of Issei. He looked happy, friendly, and held no anger in him for his father. He smirks as he sees this, an obvious request from Lucifer himself to help save his little brother from destroying himself with all of his inner hate. You cheeky brats, making an old man like me work so much, hee. Don't worry, I will find a way to help him, I promise on my father's soul. Chapter 14, A Super Stray. Time skip, Underworld Gremory territory. Below the many beautifully decorated halls and luxurious rooms of the Gremory mansion lies a dungeon of sorts. With its long and narrow hallways, hopeless cells, and fear-inducing rooms, it was to say not the most welcoming place in this mansion of glamour and beauty. It had been built a little over 150 years ago as a sort prison and job for one of the children of the Gremory house, namely Rias Gremory or Issei Hyoudou. It had been built for him so that he could have a role in the family, as he was not a high-class devil, so he couldn't get a peerage, nor could he take over as a new heir to the Gremory by the virtue of him not being a full-blooded devil. So he was given the title of Dungeon Keeper, as his adoptive parents and older brother found his abilities, even from a young age, to perfectly match with the role. So when he was old enough, they gave him full rights and authority in the dungeon. He was about 6 years old by human standards when this happened. Though when the next heir, or rather heiress to the Gremory family, was born, his role soon changed from Dungeon Keeper to Guardian Dragon for the little Rias. His love was much like Surzet's in the beginning, that of an older brother Siskin, but it slowly over time morphed into something else. It changed so much that when Rias was given her evil pieces, he offered himself as her first piece and left behind his other roles. But then here comes the question, what became of his dungeon? It became his own personal prison after an aggressive change in both personality and how he acted towards those around him. So he was chained up there for most of the time, only being let out after Surzets had given Rias or Lord and Lady Gremory approval. His time in there only halted his progressively more aggressive personality. It didn't stop it, and so every time he was let out, he seemed to be more and more evil. After the whole final test thing Azazel had planned, where Issei almost killed Saji just with his bare fist, Issei was unsurprisingly placed in his chains again. Grafia had to do it, much to both parties' dismay, as neither of them very much liked the other. At least they respected each other for the sole notition of both being from a rather dark background, at least with family names and such. So after Grafia had chained him up with all 110 chains, she left Issei to himself in the silence of the dark. It had been hours since he had been put in chains, and he was just sitting on his bed and waiting for something to happen. His body had been forcefully changed back into his human form, making his current self very easily damaged by the magic inside of the chains, so no transforming, as it would set off the magic and maybe ruin his arms and body for a very long time. Well, I guess I should have seen this coming. I really am an idiot if all it takes to make me angry is for someone to say my name, Issei thought as he hung his head over in defeat. I'm pathetic, wouldn't you say so too, D-Drake? Me, the strongest hatchling of all time, and I can't even hold back my own anger. He spoke out loud to no one really, only really mentioning D-Drake's name in the slight hope he would say something to him. He didn't. Issei just laughed sadly as he kept his head down, not seeing the ball of fire closing in on him. He did begin to hear the footsteps of the person, but couldn't smell or sense who it was. He couldn't smell them because of the stench in this place, and he couldn't sense them since he wasn't allowed to use magic in these chains. Who's there? Is that you, Azazel? Surzets. Before he could speak his adoptive mother's name, the person spoke out to him. Issei, my dear sweet boy, are you okay? Asked Asia, as worry could be heard in her voice. Her walking began to pick as she began to semi-run over to him. Issei smiled a bit, thanking either one of the dragon gods that his mother had come to see him, and also cursing them for making her see him in this state. I am fine, mother, just got a bit beat up after I hope I didn't burn you too much. He tried to keep his voice in a neutral state, but felt it was too much as he knew he had really fucked up this time. Asia came closer, only standing a few feet away, trying her best to look for any wounds, but found none as Issei only got emotional damage, not physical. I'm fine, I am a dragon too, at least not as much as you or your father. Asia spoke sweetly, not realizing her words hurt her son. She came closer to him, holding out a hand and putting on his chin, moving his head up to see hers. His eyes widened a bit when saw her face covered by bandages, making him close his eyes almost as soon as he saw it. What's wrong, Vritra? Oh, I know I am a little bit hurt, but I am okay. You could never hurt me, you're just like your father in that way. She spoke with a soothing tone, but not soothing enough for Issei. But he did hurt you, and I did too. He whispered. Asia only heard mumbles, but could tell from the few words she could understand that he knew of something she didn't. What do you mean by that, dear? Please tell me so I can help you with, or maybe. Issei turned his towards her, his eyes transforming into silt, setting off the chains to begin burning his neck. But he did. How don't you remember this? He killed you before I was born, Issei yelled out, his voice sounding hurt and pained. Asia looked at him confused and shocked that he would say something like this. But she wanted to help him, even if it meant having to hear her son speaking ill of her husband. I don't think you're thinking clearly, sweetie, and I don't think you should say stuff like that about your father. But I want to help you, so please try to explain yourself. What did you mean by your father killing me before you were born? Asia asked. Issei just looked at her shocked when he now realized that she had forgotten or maybe just didn't know. Issei just kept looking at her blankly as he was trying to understand or think of an answer to why she didn't remember this. He took in a deep breath before exhaling. He looked up to her, their eyes meeting, her emerald green and his purple human eyes. When I had just become aware of my sacred gear, I had a vision of sorts. Maybe calling it a memory is more accurate, but I saw the scene of you two standing in front of my egg. It was the day I was supposed to have been born. Issei said, his voice already laced with slight fear at telling this. Asia, though, was silent, only nodding as to tell him to continue. You both stood in front of my egg, both showing your affection and discussing something, maybe my name, I don't know. But before I could be born, that monster killed you and ate you right in front of my egg. I had been awaking at that moment, but I had still yet to leave my egg. Issei said, looking up again to see how she had reacted. She was crying, as in her eyes seemed to be a sort of remembrance or regained memory of this. She fell down on her knees as her tears began to come falling out like a waterfall. She looked straight ahead at the wall behind Issei, while Issei kept looking at her, hoping she would say something, though what she did do was something he didn't expect. Issei, make me into Asia Argento. I don't want you two monsters in my head. She cried out as fear, anger, and horror surfaced on her face. Issei was stunned by this. His own mother had just said she didn't want anything to do with him, that she saw him as no more than a monster. His eyes became blank as a more dull purple began to take the place of his usual purple eyes. Asia, at the lack of him answering her, stood up and slapped him on his cheek with all the force she could muster. It didn't hurt Issei, but it also did, at least on the inside. Do one good thing in your life, you monster. I never wanted this, so you better clean up this mess, Asia screamed at him as she slapped him again. Issei just looked at his mother as she unleashed her fear, anger, and rage on her beloved son. She hates him, she hates his father for what he did to her. So why did she hate him too? Was it just because he was his son? Do it Ritara least, then you'll be less like your father, Asia screamed as she kicked him in the face. His body was shaking as a bubble of emotion was beginning to build up and force its way out of him. He slowly stood up, the chains rattling as he did. Asia stepped back, fear written all over her face as flashbacks of that day came to her, as this whole scene, at least to her, felt like that day. Issei reached up with one hand, holding onto one of the chains on his neck, clenching his hand around it so hard it began to shake. His emotions were beginning to come out and he didn't want to be here when it happened. His body began to transform, making him feel immense pain. Asia began to step back, scared she was going to be killed again like before. Issei had no emotions on his face, only an unbelievable sadness in his eyes. The chains broke, setting off many alarms in the mansion. He stood still for a few seconds before staring emotionlessly at his mother. He then looked up towards the roof of the dungeon before his body began to transform into his true form. His aura blew out, destroying the walls and roof of the dungeon. He began to get bigger and bigger. He roared out with all of his rage, hate, and sadness. The mansion was beginning to shake just from his aura alone. He then looked at Asia one last time, her body frozen with fear. He looked up again before flying upwards, destroying the ground and the entrance hall of the mansion, scaring many of the servants as the giant body of a dragon flew right by them, and out of the roof and into the air above. The guards couldn't do anything, as before they even got in the air themselves, he had flown off to only Satan knows where. Rias, Aquino, Azazel, Grafia, Lord Zeoticus, and Lady Venelana all stood and viewed this whole disaster from a different side of the mansion. No one said a single word, only the distant roar of Issei and the crying and yelling of the many servants could be heard. The silence was only broken when Venelana fell on her knees and began sobbing. Her husband Zeoticus tried to help her to the best of his ability. Grafia, seemingly without getting approval, sprinted off to find her own son, hoping he hadn't been caught in this mess. Rias was sad that she had just lost her strongest piece as well as her plaything and her older brother. The last bit was only felt slightly. Aquino didn't know what to feel. Should she be happy, angry, or sad? She didn't really know, and so she kept a straight face. Azazel walked closer to the window as he inspected Issei's body and sensed his power. He was unsure of how he was supposed to proceed with his secret deal with Surzets, or if he even should, as judging by the direction Issei was going, he would end up in the wasteland before anyone in the devil territory would get to him. A red magical circle, bearing the new Lucifer emblem, was formed in the room behind the group. Out of it came an obviously angry Surzet as his aura was leaking out of him, enough to make the air around him destroy itself. What happened here? He asked, no longer being an older brother or model son but a leader. His parents couldn't speak as they were still unsure themselves, and Rias and Aquino were caught up in their own thoughts, so Azazel was the only choice left. The time skip, underworld devil territory. In a giant and very grandiose building on the outskirts of Lilith, the devil capital, a grand party was being held there. The devil youth's party, to be exact, where all of the young heirs and heiresses would show up, say what their desire is in front of the devil kings and the devil council. Then afterward a rating game tournament begin to see who was the strongest youth among them. But before the tournament rankings were announced, and after the youths had spoken about their desires, there was a party. Many tables with high-class food, drinks, and other such things stood all around the luxuriously decorated hall. The grand windows, which gave a beautiful view to a surrounding forest, had been offered with different design curtains, namely were the icon of the 4 devil kings, the devil councils, and the family emblems of the different heirs and heiresses' families. One of those families being the Gremorys, though only Lord Zeoticus and Rias Gremory had come, as Lady Venelana had fallen ill. Though this was more of a mask or lie to hide the disaster that happened only 2 days earlier, Rias and her peerage stood in the hall, over at one of the tables, though none of them looked very chipper. Rias had to fake a smile most of the time, and when she wasn't doing that she looked angry. Aquino was still not totally sure what to feel, and so kept up her straight face, hiding it with her kind smile. Kiba, Zenovia, Kaneko, and Gasper just looked normal, as they weren't as attached to him, and frankly were happy he was gone. Though Asia, she was different. She seemed like a different person most of the time, and whenever someone mentioned Issei, she would have a horrified face. They didn't know she had been the root cause of this, nor what kind of relationship Issei had to the person behind Asia's voice. They had all noticed this, even Rias, though she had to have it told to her by Aquino, so they all tried to help in some way, as she seemed to have taken this whole thing rather hard. Rias sighed before turning towards her peerage, her face no longer holding a smile but a tired one instead. "I wish we could leave soon, my face is killing me from smiling so much." "Are you okay, Asia?" Rias asked, as she noticed Asia staring off in a random direction. Rias couldn't see her face, but Gasper and Kaneko could, and they saw her looking terrified. Kaneko looked towards the place Asia was looking at, becoming confused when she saw Sona and her peerage coming towards them. Rias and the others also noticed where she was looking and become even more confused. When the other peerage came close enough, with Sona, Tsubaki, and Saji at the front, Asia silently backed away behind Zenovia. Both Sona and Rias noticed this, both wanting to know what was so scary for her to behave like this. "Rias," Sona said, wanting to still seem courtly, before she could ask about what Asia was scared of. "Sona," Rias said back, her face now holding a more genuine smile than before. "Interesting dream you have, to become the champion of the rating games, though it might be just a bit childish, wouldn't you say?" Sona said, trying to be a bit funny, but from the lack of giggles and tired faces could see this wasn't the time. "Sorry, I wanted to liven the mood. You have all been kind of off for the whole night," Sona said, pointing out the obvious. "Yes, well, when, wait, have Sarafal-sama told you?" Rias asked, to which Sona nodded, making Rias continue. "Okay, then I don't know what to tell you, as it should be pretty obvious," Rias said, to which Sona nodded again. "You are correct, but it does make me sad to know an old friend has chosen this kind of path in life." "Do you know why he ran away?" Sona asked, with a small pitch of pity in her voice, as even if it didn't seem like it, Issei and Sona used to be friends when they were kids. Rias shook her head before sighing deeply. "No one knows, he just began to leak an awful. What happened to Issei?" "Rias-sama, please, I need to know, he is my friend," Saji suddenly interrupted. He sounded very worried, enough to make Sona not punish him, at least not now. Asia looked afraid when he suddenly spoke up, hiding away more behind Zenovia. "I thought everyone in your peerage knew about this, but it seems not," Rias said, her voice becoming a bit more calm than her earlier one. "Yes, well, he was knocked out till this morning, and I didn't have time to tell him before this whole thing began," Sona explained, as Saji kinda looked annoyed, which he was, as no one had told what had happened. "Oh, can one of you tell me already?" he demanded, but not with getting a pair of threatening eyes from Sona, as she didn't want other nobles to think she didn't teach her peerage anything. "It's all right, he deserves to know," Rias said. After a second or two, Sona just sighed before Rias began to tell Saji what had happened. How Issei almost killed him, how he was put in an underground prison, and how he suddenly broke out of it and flew off into the wastelands of the underworld. So now Surzech and Azazel are working together on finding him and bring him back before he becomes a stray, or else he would be classified as a super stray, the first of its kind. Rias said after finishing her long explanation, making Saji fearful of what might happen to Issei. The others, besides Saji, who had already heard all of this, still felt a few chills go up their spines at the thought. What if Issei did become a stray? Would he really become so strong? A thought most of them thought, as the power he had in their test began resurfacing, making them believe this to be a likely possibility. "So what are we to do if we meet him or see him?" Saji asked curiously. Rias raised an eyebrow at his question. "Well, you would be advised to contact Sona or Tsubaki so that they can call in stronger reinforcements," Rias answered. Saji just looked lost, as her words seemed to have crushed what little hope he had of talking with Issei again and finding a better way to solve this. Vritra could see the thoughts Saji was having and felt he didn't fully understand why his host would want to do this, besides his still not fully realized crush. At least that's what Vritra would call for now. But while Vritra was overseeing the conversation between the devils, he noticed one of them. A blonde-haired girl, with emerald-green eyes, standing behind a taller girl with blue hair. He could feel something oddly familiar about her, like an old friend or family member you hadn't seen in years. Then when you saw them again, they had changed into a different person. Asia moved her head out to the side of Zenovia's torso, revealing her face as Aquino had asked why she was hiding. At the sight of her face, her voice, and that aura she was giving off, Vritra couldn't stop himself from calling it out. Suddenly Saji's sacred gear summoned themselves, raising his power by at least 50%, making many of the guests and his friends look at him surprised by his sudden action. But before he could say anything, Vritra made his official debut as Reawaken, along with something else. Darling, my dear Asia, my dear sweet mate, you're alive. Oh, how I have missed you every day in this damned prison of mine, my sweet darling Asia. Vritra roared out of the sacred gear, confusing everyone and scaring Asia half to dead at the sound of her husband. Chapter 15, Trouble. Underworld Wasteland. Have you seen anything yet, Magi's? Asked a devil soldier as he landed next to another devil, one called Magi's. Magi's turned to his comrade before shaking his head. No, nothing yet, well, besides rocks and sand. Magi said as he continued to stare out over the open wastelands before him, only a few rocks standing above it, with even fewer mountains reaching out of the sand. The other devil, one Hanris Dekal, sighed deeply as he sat down on a nearby rock. Why are we doing this again? It's just some reincarnated devil who couldn't take it anymore and ran away from home, so why is it so important we find him? Shouldn't we be hunting the Chaos Brigade or maybe that SS-class stray? Hanris asked, his tone being obviously annoyed, as he and many others had been out here for 2 days now looking for someone. I know you don't like this, but it's an order from Lucifer himself, so we can't just give up without trying. And if he is sending us out here, then it means he believes in us and that this person might be very important. We could finally become high-class devils if we find him. Magi said, trying to make Hanris become more interested, which seemed to work as he jumped off the rock with a new wave of energy. Right, let's do this and then we can be lazy for the rest of our live. Hanris was stopped mid-speech by someone cutting him clean in half, letting both halves of him fall to the ground. Magi stood there frozen in fear, not even reacting when blood began to come spraying out of Hanris, hitting him in the face. He was more scared of the man who stood behind where Hanris had stood before. He had long blonde and black spiked hair, and 2 different colored eyes to match his hair color. He wore a simple shirt with what seemed like a pair of long shorts, both were black with blonde marks all over. Before Magi's could say, do, or think, he was blown up with a giant stack of black lighting. HMP, simple-minded idiots, you all really thought you could my domain without me noticing. I guess my lack of payback has made your egos and pride turn you into this, Crom said. Before turning around and walking past the few other groups of devils he had killed today. But I do wonder, who is this person that has made them become this? Stupid I guess, as to make them all venture into my domain, guess I should give them a visit. Crom said before another stack of black lighting hit him. When it was gone, he had disappeared with it to only God knows where. The underworld devil territory at the party. My dear darling Asia, my love and light in my tormented life, how I have missed you. Vritra roared out again, his voice sounding joyful and relieved to see her again after over 1,000 years. The many guests surrounding the group were all shocked to learn the heiress of the Citri clan had Vritra's host as a servant. But the main group, though, were all stunned to learn of Asia's connection to Vritra, and Issei too. Both Sona and Rias were still trying to process this information, and the others didn't feel they had a place in this upcoming conversation. But not Aquino. She stood right next to Asia and could see the fear on her face. Aquino didn't know why she did this, but she wanted to. With one hard slap, Asia was down on the floor as a red mark now had formed on her left cheek. You gave birth to that monster, Aquino asked, her voice sounding angry, but in her eyes tears had begun to gather. Asia held a hand up to her cheek, shock written all over her face, though it was quickly forgotten as the ancient dragon roared out in anger. Don't touch her, you dirty half-blood. Don't you dare touch my mate filth. Are you okay, my dear? Vritra roared out as his aura, even though it was suppressed by the gear he was inside of, made everyone close to the 2 peerages feel a sudden wave of dread and fear come from Saji's arm. Aquino had this feeling, this want to fight back against the dragon, but Rias with a quick hand draw and step stopped her. I am terribly sorry, Dragon King Vritra, but do know she didn't mean to offend you as she's been very stressed lately. I hope you can forgive her. Rias said, bowing before the aura that was being released from Saji's hand. Aquino wanted to say something, but one sharp glare from Rias made her back down, at least for now. I will not accept this offense, but as I can't do anything for now, you shall be spared, Crow. Now Saji, walk over and help my mate. Vritra semi-ordered, making Saji look over to Sona asking for permission, which he gained as Sona nodded with careful look in her eyes. Saji walked over to the still knocked down Asia. As he tried to come closer, she crawled away from him, making him stop and looking at her confused. Don't come closer, you monster, Asia said, her voice trembling with how scared she was. Asia, my dear, what's wrong? It's me, your Vritra. I know what you did, you monster. You and your monster of a son have nothing to do with me, not anymore. Asia yelled out, cutting Vritra off. Vritra was confused at her statement, even hurt by her cruel words, but then something else began to stir inside of him. Rage that she would call his child a monster. Vritra, I know you're angry, but I don't hh. Saji suddenly began to scream out in pain. Then he fell down on his knees, still screaming out in pain. Sona ran over to him, going down on her knees trying to look for what was wrong. "Saji, what's wrong?" Sona cried out as Saji continued to scream in pain. Though it began to slowly morph into a roar, he suddenly went on all fours, standing like an animal. The many pieces of his sacred gears began to unleash an awful amount of dread and rage, but it was obvious for the people with a better aspect of sense, could tell it was not Saji's rage, but Vritra. "Don't you dare call Ritara that. He is much better than I am, and you should know that he has your heart. You should be ashamed to call yourself a mother," roared out, his love for his son being more than his love for his mate, at least in this instant. Saji kept screaming out, but he tried to mentally calm Vritra, but the old dragon was not having it, as his aura kept leaking out through the many sacred gears on Saji's body. The party hall became fully focused on this single instant, as no one could overlook the hanging feeling of dread and bloodlust coming from the two peerages. It even stopped the 9 faction officials, who had been discussing another and much more important matter. It was Surzech, Serafal, Ajak and Grafia for devils, Michiel for the angels, Azazel, Shamaza and Barakiel for the fallen angels, and Odin the All-Father and his guard Roswace the Valkyrie. Odin, the oldest of the and one of the most powerful gods in Europair, began to laugh at the sight of all the devils, the few fallen angels and pure angels all being focused on the youngsters. "Is this some kind of entertainment, you brat Azazel?" the old man jokingly asked, never taking things too seriously, and thus his way of speaking was not very serious either. Azazel knew this, and it was also one of the reasons why they got along so well. "Well, old man, if I told you so, would you believe it?" Azazel joked back, earning a sigh from his 2 more serious companions and a small chuckle from Odin. "Lord Odin, this is no time to joke around. It's clear the devils are planning something. We shouldn't have come," the Valkyrie said sternly, making the nearby devils, at least Serafal, pout at the insult. Odin just sighed tiredly at her statement, raising a hand up stopping her from saying any more. "You see, this is why no one wants to date you, Roswace. You're always too serious," Odin said, making the gray-haired beauty fall onto the floor on her knees, begin to sob and cry. That's not true. I just don't have enough time for relationships," Roswace cried, making Odin sigh again. "I am sorry for the young woman here. She just gets really easily upset when it comes to these things." "It's fine, Lord Odin. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a party and heiresses to save," Surzech said before going off stage with Grafia following after him. Azazel also followed after them, wanting to see what all the fuss was about, and maybe see if he could get a clue to where Issei would go. When the 3 much more powerful beings neared the crowd, they were let in and now saw the sight of Saji being held back Kaneko, Kiba, Zenobia, Yura and Meguri, as he seemed to be trying to claw Asia with his hands. Surzech's presence didn't seem to stop them, not even when he tried to leak some of his aura, so he chose the old and tested method. "Stop this instant," shouting at the top of his lunges, which seemed to work as Saji turned his attention towards him. Though his eyes weren't his gray ones but bright purple, he only saw it for a split second when all of a sudden they changed back to gray, and he and the group of people trying to pull him back all fell over. Surzech sighed, already feeling a headache coming on and that the old fools in the Devil Council would use this against him and the other Devil Kings. "Rias, Sona, follow me and bring your peerages. We're going to have to talk about this," Surzech said, feeling the many stares from the other guests, judging him silently. Sona and Rias both agreed, though as precaution Grafia suddenly bound Saji in some magic. They began to walk out of the main hall and towards a side room, a room that was planned to be used for further discussion between the 3 biblical factions in Norse mythology. Azazel followed along, wanting to find out as much as he could. He was also curious about what he saw, as he also saw the sudden change in eye color from Saji. But before they could enter, a sudden wave of magic could be felt in the room. "What is it now?" Surzech asked, slightly annoyed. Underworld wasteland. Somewhere up high on the tallest mountain in the underworld, which also happened to be placed right in the middle of the wasteland. On a circle-like cliff side, sat 7 different beings, all of them being extremely powerful and not giving a damn about hiding it. And even if someone did pick up on it, what could they do against the most powerful evil dragons? Krom Kruach, Apophis, Ladun, Azidahaka, Nirhurger, Grendel and Yamada no Arachi. Who could beat them all alone? Only the dragon gods, and even then it would be tough, as an evil dragon usually don't live long, as all factions have put a hit on their head the moment they become one. So if one lives as long as they have, then they're just that strong, and it's the reason they can sit here and show off their aura without a care. "So what's with this sudden meeting, Krom? I was having a pretty nice nap before you woke me up," Ladun said, a bit of annoyance obvious in his voice, but his question was valid as the others wanted to know as well. "Yeah, do tell, or else I have some dumb shit I need to train that Rivzim gave me." Grendel piped in too, though his voice was relaxed, mostly because he didn't have to watch a bunch of wussies train for the next half an hour. Krom just smirked as he raised his hands in a defensive way before getting out of his stony throne. "My friends, calm yourselves. I have good reasons for calling you all here. It happens to be about our dear Lord Lucifer." Anyone could practically hear the amount of disrespect he had in the way he said that name, as why would he respect someone who sees himself above a dragon? Nierherger stood up himself and walked over to him, standing in the middle of the circle of dragons. So then what is it? I have a job to be doing, and right now I am losing at least 100 years worth of time. That tree won't poison itself, he yelled as raised his arms up high, trying to make a bigger impact. He just earned him a chuggle from Grendel, making him turn towards him semi-pissed. What? He roared at him. Oh, it's nothing. I just find it so fucking pathic that some of you guys have this whole thing with having to kill or destroy one specific thing. Why not just wreak havoc everywhere like me and Crom do? Grendel asked as he stretched his belly, switching his legs, making his left lie on his right and having both legs hanging over the side of a stone seat. Nierherger just seemed to get more pissed, as he flicked his tongue angrily out and in his mouth. Before the dragons could continue this, for now, the verbal fight, Crom began to speak again. I know, but I have an idea of how you could do that. I have an idea for how we all can do what we want, Crom said as he turned towards the edge of cliff, having a 3 km drop before him, not that it would kill him. The other ancient dragons looked at him, their attention focused solely on him as one thought went through all of their minds. Do what we all want. Apophis chuggled a bit as he spread his legs, putting his arms on his legs for support and having his hands under his chin. Do what we all want, really? That's your angle. I have heard better offers from Ra. Apophis continued to chuggle as his long black hair began to rise, forming many snake-like heads, all of them looking at Crom. Sure, it's not the best offer, but it's also the most natural one if you think about it. Not that any of you do though, so I guess I should explain it so all of you can understand, Crom said, earning himself a few low growls from the others. He raised both of his arms, forming his aura around him. His arms didn't look like arms, as they looked more like wings with magical thin skin. His head had 2 giant horns, they too were made of magic. The others looked closely, as none of them knew what he was up to. His aura had begun to form a giant dark cloud right above the mountain top, swirling around menacingly, with a few crackles and bolts dancing out of the cloud and back into it. I, Crom Cruach, offer you all the chance to join me and start our own faction. One where we can make every faction fear us and let those idiot devils who think they're better than us realize that they shouldn't have been so open about their plans, Crom said, before letting his arms down and having the cloud above them go absolutely ballistic as it destroyed most of the mountainside. Though none of the 8 dragons cared about that, as they were more curious about how he planned to teach those devil a lesson. So will we do this, make the devils realize that they shouldn't have been open? I don't really know anything we can use against them, Azzy Dahaka asked, earning a chuggle from Crom. Oh, you poor idiots really don't know much, do you? We're going to use the beast snatch right away from those prideful idiots, Crom said. There was complete silence before a combined roar. HOW? Crom just looked at them a bit shocked before sighing. When they find out where it's sealed and have released it, then we snatch away Rizvim's mind control thing and put it under our control instead. Crom said it like it was a matter of fact, like something that anyone would think. The others just went wide-eyed, all looking at each other in complete silence. Then an almost lethal amount of dread and bloodlust was released from them all, as they all formed toothy smirks and turned their sights towards Crom as he sat down in his throne. He too had a smirk, but his eyes were something else. He had his usually blonde and black eyes changed for a blonde and black stack of lighting. Before we go too far with this, I will need to invite one more person. He will be useful, very useful. Crom spoke, the others just nodding in response. The mountain was almost completely covered in a feeling of bloodlust. Chapter 16, Family Reunion. Underworld Wasteland. On top of the fully soaked mountain of bloodlust, one of the evil dragons stopped having a toothy smirk and instead had a wondering expression. It was Apophis and his many snake-like heads made of his black hair. They all looked between each other and him like they were talking about something. Crom, who would this person happen to be since you would like him to join us? He must be strong if you believe him to be useful, Apophis asked, making the others also look at him, now wondering the same. He had asked a good question, since none of them knew of any powerful evil dragon besides themselves, and the few others who did exist were all dead. And Vritra was sealed, so they really didn't have a clue who this evil dragon would be. Crom just looked at Apophis a bit shocked. You mean, you don't remember him? Crom asked, genuinely shocked, which made the others even more confused. No, I don't think I do. I would remember most people I meet if they were strong or had something interesting to them, Apophis said before shrugging his shoulders. Crom just sighed before reaching his hand upwards. The other looked at him weirdly, all of them besides Grendel, as he began to run. The others were now more confused before a giant stack of black lighting hit Apophis square on the head. It didn't hurt him that much, but he still hissed, very angered by this. What in Ra's golden sun was that for? Apophis yelled, not caring that he used a phrase his eternal enemy had made. Crom just looked at him neutral before speaking again. That was a much lighter punishment than the one our dear dragon goddess over there would have given you, wouldn't you say so, Apophis? Crom said, as all of them looked towards the sudden snake that had just summoned itself out of thin air. Right you are, evil dragon, I would have killed you, snake, for not remembering my son, Offais said in her stoic voice, making all of the other dragons have wide eyes at sudden her appearance and her statement. Her son? I thought Lilith was an only child. Apophis thought, making him grind his brain and break a lot of gears to remember who this man could be. He gave up though, having a bit of defeated look to him as still tried to remember, even if he had given up. Crom sighed before sitting down in a more comfortable way. She's talking about our dear fallen dragon king Vritra's hatchling Issei Gremory. He recently agreed to have Offais become his godmother, thereby making him her child. Crom explained, his voice sounding just a bit happy about the last bit. The others just looked at him, all having stunned faces as they were trying to wrap themselves around the fact that Vritra had a kid. B said kid has been adopted by Offais, making them a demigod by name only, and C was related to Crom somehow. What? Crom asked as he noticed the stunned faces and almost too quiet silence. Grendel was the only one brave enough to ask, so after sitting down on his chair, he raised his head to have eye contact with Crom. Did you and Vritra have a child together? Grendel asked. For once, instead of joking and uncaring tone, it was dead serious. There was now a new silence, an awkward one, as everyone was now looking at Crom, even Offais. Offais mostly because she found this amusing, as she knew most of the truth, at least more than any of the people gathered here. Crom lowered his head before holding a hand over it, then he began laughing. The others, except Offais, felt a bit afraid as Crom's laughs became more insane. He then stopped and looked directly at Grendel with the most stoic face they had ever seen. It could rival and beat Offais. No, he's my nephew, Crom said. The others didn't like how he sounded, as his stoic voice and face did not match the Crom they all knew. It didn't match the whole, super evil Dragon King image they all had of him. At the lack of questions or talking, Offais decided to speak up again. So why do you want to invite my son into your little evil dragon club now? You could have done this over 100 years ago, she asked, raising a good question for Crom answer and also something the others became confused about. Well, goddess, if you all must really know, he wasn't ready back then and the time wasn't right to start this whole faction yet, Crom answered. His answer was reasonable to most of them, as some of them were still not yet aware of each other's situation, as in if they were dead or sealed. Plus they didn't have something like the beast, or at least a plan to use it back then. Though Offais didn't agree with his explanation, she had reached out to Crom as one of the first people to join her on the journey to regain her home. Back then he had said he didn't want to be a part of any faction, he just wanted to be by himself. The others had already taken his words for what they were, and didn't question it any deeper. Offais still had her stoic face, so no one could see the still irritation over his lie, but no one could see her confusion either over why he chose to lie. Are you all satisfied now? If so, I have a nephew to find. He should have apparently run away from the devil territory. So I would like to be a supportive uncle if you don't mind, Crom said, but this time his voice held more of his normal charm. The underworld devil territory, devil youth party. Up above the space where all the guests stood, a magical blue gate manifested itself. It had many different Norse runes on it, but it held mostly one specific to one of the Norse gods. Loki came out of the door, making his father Odin sigh at his son's actions. I object to this meeting. Father, you should not bow to these weaker factions, Loki yelled out as the gate behind him disappeared. Odin just sighed again at his son's antics. Well, what would you have me do instead then, Loki? Let the Chaos Brigade do as they wish and destroy the biblic factions, then who will they destroy after them? Odin asked Loki, who just smirked. He had a lot of pride, too much if anything. Surely, father, we can beat them on our own. After all, they're just outcasts of lesser factions, Loki said, no hint of doubt in his voice. And this, my son, is why you'll never be given an important role in Asgard. You view everyone as lesser unless they're the same as you. Your pride will one day be your downfall. Odin spoke, his voice rough with the knowledge of his many thousands years of living. He too had been prideful and it had cost him. Surzets flew up from the floor to be on a similar height to Loki. Lord Loki, I will excuse this if you back down now. Loki just scoffed at his words. Surzet's face was rather neutral, as he was trying to hide his irritation and tiredness. Many of the leaders in the biblical factions had been informed about the possible super stray. Only Azazel, Seraphol, and Ajak had been told who this really was. That case, the Chaos Brigade, and now Loki was beginning to get to him, something the other leaders gathered could see or at least sense. He began to unleash his aura, only a small dose as a way to tell Loki to step down now. Odin would have stepped in had it not been for Loki's next words. If my pride will be my downfall, then you joining Offais' side will be yours, father. Odin looked stunned as he remembered the day Offais had come and asked for his faction's help with something. That something being killing Great Red, something he didn't want to take part in as would mean his and his family's downfall. Loki, what have you done? Odin spoke with anger in his voice. Loki just smirked even more as he showed off his aura, letting everyone feel the slight and almost missable bit that was clearly not his own aura. It was an infinite feeling and almost voidless too, a clear sign that it belonged to Offais. I have done what you couldn't do, father. I took an unknown path and became more powerful for it. Loki yelled out as his aura began to fill most of the hall, making the weaker guests feel light-headed and some just outright faint. "Stand down this instant, Loki, or you will have to face a much worse punishment than any I have given you before," Odin yelled to his son as he noticed both Surzech and Ajak powering up slightly. He had tried to warn him, but as he was now a member of the Chaos Brigade, he was thereby a terrorist in enemy territory. He couldn't do anything outside of trying to make him rethink his actions. But his words fell on deaf ears. "I care not, this is only part of my destiny. Soon Ragnarok will be upon us, this was only a stepping stone in my story," Loki yelled out as he began to form many different magical circles behind him, most of them being ice magic. Odin sighs in defeat as he sees this. He then looks towards Surzech, getting eye contact for a split second. Surzech understood his unspoken words, letting Ajak know as well with a similar method. Surzech used a much more refined version of his power of destruction, forming them into small bullets and firing them at the many different magical circles behind Loki. It broke the spells, making Loki have to remake them and charge them up again. This gave Ajak time to charge a capturing spell, which he fired off as soon as he had given enough power to last for one whole day. Suddenly Loki was captured inside a crystal-like magical pyramid. For one moment Loki looked a bit stunned, then his face gained a scowl as he then pointed angrily at Ajak. "Is this all you can do, you so-called super devil? A simple capture spell, you're all pathe." Before he said anything else, the pyramid and Loki teleported away to some barren area in the devil territory. The two super devils powered down again as the threat had been removed, if only momentarily. They needed to make a plan to capture Loki in a more permanent prison. The underworld wasteland, undeveloped civilization. In the wastelands, in a faraway corner, far from the eyes of the major underworld factions, a small and young civilization had begun to rise. Its people were a mixture of different races, but they all shared one thing in common, that they were all considered demons or monsters. They did pose demonic powers and monstrous strength, but they too had come to a point in their history where they wanted to be more, and thus they had begun to make their civilization. It of course had its struggles, as there were no trees or any chance to grow anything. So they overcame those things by hunting for food and by using stones in more advanced ways than most other civilizations had done at their beginning. They had already begun to play with metals, having animals as food sources and other useful resources. If they had started when everyone else had, then they would have been one of the great ones. Even now they could still reach that goal in maybe only a few hundred years more. But the world would never know, as the great town that housed this new faction was no more than rubble and ruins. Giant baths of purple fire were spread all over the place, along with giant tracks of a snake were visible in the would-be roads and sands around the town. The cries and screams of the last few remaining people could be heard, until they suddenly stopped. In the former town center stood a monster. He was a mix of dragonic features and human ones, having a long tail with a lethally shaped end. His arms and legs were covered in black scales. He had no shoes on, so the guards who were still trying to fight him could see his clawed feet. His hands were also clawed. He was easily as tall as the guards, but was thinner compared to them. He had his head and face covered by his long purple and black hair. The only things the guards could see were the purple lights in his eyes and two black horns sticking out of his head. If they were seen as monsters, then he would be seen as the monster of all monsters. He slowly lowered his hands, making the guards think he was surrendering. He wasn't, and had done it only to make the guards put their guard down. "Fucking dumb asses, he," Issei said before slashing his arms in cross and killing them all. More blood splattered onto the sands and dead bodies that had been put there before. Issei moved his hands up to his head, holding it for a bit. He sighed heavily before moving his hair off his face. His face had aged somewhat, his skin had become much darker in tone, and his mouth had become larger, or at least wider. He winced a bit before putting his right hand on his left side, as he felt a stirring pain rise from that area mostly. He looked at the area before wincing again as the pain came back before disappearing again. He didn't know what this pain was, but he had a good idea of what it might be. He was becoming a stray, but because he hadn't killed Rias and he is trying to fight it, it is hurting him. That was his main theory for now. He would ask Drake as he would know for sure, but he wouldn't answer no matter how much Issei had tried to talk with him for the last 4 or 3 days. He was so occupied with his left side that he didn't hear the small monster that was running at him. They were roaring as they opened their mouths, ready to bite him. It leaped at him, its many sharp teeth ready to bite down on him. But when it bit him, its teeth almost broke on impact with Issei's scars. Only then did Issei notice its presence. He used his tail to grab it by the leg and make it face him face to face. When Issei saw it, his eyes went a bit wide before narrowing a bit again. The monster he was holding in his tail was a young boy. He could tell by the smell he was giving off it was similar to one of the guards he had fought earlier. This kid was one of the guards he just killed. He had tried to get revenge for murder of his father, maybe even for the murder of his family and home. Issei didn't know and didn't really care either. He looked blankly at the small boy, wondering who he could have been in a few years from now if he hadn't decided to attack this place. His tail began to slowly coil itself around the boy's neck before tightening itself. Slowly and surely the boy began to lose the light in his eyes. His arms, which he had been swiping at Issei with, went limp, and soon the rest of his body. And then his heartbeat ceased. His dead body was dropped to the ground with no remorse from his killer. Issei turned around as the sound of few remaining cries could be heard. He began walking towards the source of the sound, finding still half-alive people and guards along the way and striking them down for good with his tail. He found the building the cries were coming from, but when he stood outside of it, the cries became quiet and only low breaths could be heard in its place. Trying to hide now? A bit late for that. Oh well, Issei thought. He reared his head backwards, sucking in a large amount of air as he did, then he shot his back toward the building. He opened his mouth and out came dark purple flames. They consumed the building in a matter of seconds and had already filled the room inside of it, as could be heard by the screams of agony coming from inside. Issei closed his mouth again, looking at his handiwork for a bit, before heading somewhere else. Small time skip. After his massacre on the town was mostly complete, at least as far as Issei knew, he went searching for food and water in the still somewhat standing buildings. He did not find any of those things, but he did find an outdoor bath in the house of some rich citizen. He didn't think water was easy to get out here, and if someone could just have an outdoor bath here, then it must only mean they were rich. Seeing the clear water gave him a quick flash of the first time he ever saw the ocean in the human world. A giant lack of salt water, that's what he believed it was back then, before Surzech had told him what it really was. He had even met the Midgard serpent in it once, over 150 years ago. It was quite the sight to see the second longest dragon in the supernatural world. He also noticed, when his mind left the realm of memories and returned to reality, that his rather ruined clothes, if one could even them that, were almost fully soaked in blood and sand. So here he was, somewhat sweaty, dirty clothes and a bit reminiscent. So he ripped his clothes off, thinking that he could just transform to his true form and stay like that for a while, or find some clothes in the remains of the town and jump into the bath. It was a nice soothing warmth that embraced him when his toes touched the water. It felt relaxing to have it touch him all over his body. Even if it did dirty the water, as sand and blood began to color the former clear water into a more brown and red color. But Issei didn't really care, and he knew a spell to clean the water, so what was the harm? Well, other than making him look a bit more insane or freaky than normal, but who was here to judge him? No one was here. His former, somewhat okay or good mood became a bit more depressing when he noticed this fact. He was alone again. He was not in his prison like so many times before, or trapped in his egg like he once was. No, this time he was free, but he was still alone. He had left his cage and his home, but found that the world outside was just as lonely as the cage was. The only difference being that at least being inside the cage meant that someone would open it at some point. He curled himself up a bit, holding his knees with both of his arms, and placed his head on top of them. He just sat there in the now much less warmer and more dirty water, thinking about this one aspect. I am still alone, even now. Why am I always alone? He screamed out in his mind, making the old dragon wake and listen in on his host's thoughts. Why is it always like this? Why couldn't I? Why couldn't just have been born normal? Why, mother, why do you hate me? Is it because I am his son? Issei thought. DxD kept listening and started to feel bad for his host. He was a misunderstood person, and these things had led him to the place in life he was now. He had never known who his parents were until after he came out of his egg. He had never understood why the people around him always had trouble or didn't want to say his name, his real name, to him. He had been used by his mate. He had been isolated far longer than any person should be, and was only brought out to do someone else's dirty work. DxD wanted to say something to his partner, but didn't feel he had the right, as he was part of the reason why Issei is the man he is today. He didn't help him just because of one flaw Issei made. So he decided to keep listening, but noticed Issei hadn't been talking or thinking to himself for a bit. He was looking at someone who DxD, as soon as he saw him, through Issei's eyes, were honest. Hey Issei, it's been a long time. How's my favorite nephew? Crom asked as he too, much like his nephew, jumped into the bath. Uncle, Issei yelled out in joy. Chapter 17, I am Vritra. Underworld Wasteland. Uncle, what are you doing here? Issei asked, seeing his uncle had given him back some joy while it had given DxD dread. He didn't want to relive what these two's last encounter had coursed. Crom just smiled warmly as he leaned back against the side of the bath he was on. Well, I heard from a little shit devil that a big black snake had left the nest and was somewhere in the wastelands, so I thought I should come by and say hello. Crom said as he winked at Issei, who just giggled at his words. Yeah, what are you really here for? It can't just be for me, or is it because I have broken one of your rules, your highness king of the wastelands? Issei said before doing a bow with his head, making Crom laugh. Issei joined in on the laughing as well. He was enjoying this moment very much. He hadn't seen his uncle in over a decade, and last time he did, DxD, Surzech and his adoptive family decided to imprison him. But right now that didn't matter right now. What mattered right now was getting to spend this moment with his uncle. No, not yet at least. Oh, I met your godmother a few hours earlier. She said hi. Crom said, but ended up with a confused face as Issei's face went pale. It only became like this when Issei heard the word mother. Crom, once again not fully living up to his titles, moved over to the side of Issei and put a hand on his left shoulder. What's wrong? I know your godmother is scary. Believe me, she would have killed one of my colleagues today if I hadn't punished him in her place. Crom said, trying to lighten the mood, but it didn't seem to work as Issei didn't seem to react. Crom moved closer, making the two touch each with their hips, which finally seemed to wake Issei from his pale state. Oh, sorry, what were you saying? Is Offai's missing me? Oh, okay, I'll see if I can see her one of these days. Hee, Issei said. This confused Crom even more, as he had never seen Issei be like this. Speaking fast, sounding slightly afraid, and having this feeling of a small, scared child for only brief seconds. Yes, she misses you, but are you sure you're okay? You seem a bit off, I mean more than back then. Now that I think about it, you haven't talked about how beautiful or interesting your mate Rias is yet, Crom said in a lighter tone, trying to lift up Issei's spirits. Issei again suddenly froze at the mention of his mate's name. He hadn't once thought about her in the last 3 or 4 days. He hadn't thought about how she might be feeling right now or how she felt about him right now. He was brought out of his thoughts as Crom spoke again, but in a way he hadn't heard in a very long time. Issei, I can't help you unless you let me know what's tormenting you. I may be the closest thing to a mortal god, but I can't read or see your thoughts. Crom said, his tone being more that of a father than one of an insightful uncle. Issei lowered his head, his long hair covering his face as well as the top of the water. I fucked up, Crom. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought it was a good idea to mess with things I didn't understand. I brought my real mother back through one of Ria's servants who happened to have a part of her soul inside of her. I then told her what happened that day, the day I was supposed to be born. She called me a monster and a mistake. Issei said, his tone sounding like he was almost on the brink of crying. Crom couldn't fully believe what he was hearing, and if he wasn't a bit on a tight schedule, he would have tried his best to help his nephew. He wanted to help, but he needed him to do something that only Issei could do. I understand, Issei. I can't fully understand, but I think I can get the idea of the pain you're going through. But now you're free, you can be yourself now. Look around you, Crom said, trying to rise his spirit so that he could convine him to do this really dumb job for Rizvim. Issei looked up and saw the things Crom was pointing at. The rubble and ruins of a once promising town and people, his handiwork and total destruction. He felt a few ways about this, but the two main ones were his pride about his ability to destroy everything before him. The other was guilt, as he had robbed many innocent people of their lives and futures. He didn't fully know what to feel, but he didn't want to appear like a wimp, not anymore for now, in front of his uncle. Look at this chaos, this destruction spurred on by nothing more than your own boredom, rage, or want. Which one was it? Crom asked, as he was kinda curious to know why this place had been destroyed, as he found it to be a fine source of entertainment to look at. I just wanted to, I guess, didn't really have a good. Crom slapped Issei hard on the back, making him stop mid-sentence. You don't need a reason to destroy whoever you want. That's the essence of being an evil dragon. Crom laughed out as he continued to slap Issei on his back. Crom's words filled Issei with a feeling of pride, and were able to hinder his guilt from gnawing at him anymore for now. He began to smile a bit as he joined Crom's in his laughter. I guess you're right. It was kind of fun to see this place be destroyed in a single night. Oh, and get this, Issei said before standing up, showing off his man bits, or lack off, as his half-dragonic and half-human form takes away most of the man bits. Issei moved his tail in front of him, showing Crom a specific area on his tail. On his tail there were the markings of a desperate bidding. So some kid tried to bite me after I killed his dad. It was kind of fun to see him try to fight me when he didn't stand a chance. Issei said as a more sadistic glint in his eyes began to form. Crom looked carefully at the marks. He could practically smell the anger and rage from them. I see, he reminds me of someone I killed decades ago. He also tried to fight me after I had destroyed his entire hometown. Lesser beings can be so interesting to watch sometimes. Crom spoke as he remembered a time long past. Crom then felt an annoyance or a headache, maybe even both coming on. Then a second after, a magical circle appeared next to his ear. He just sighed as he didn't even have to look at the circle to know it was Rizvim. What do you want, Rizvim? I am busy right now. Crom growled, even more so when the person on the other side laughed arrogantly. Crom had a pretty good idea why he had called. It's because only an hour ago he said that he was trying to recruit a new member. So now Rizvim wanted to know if Issei had said yes or no. Come now, Crom, you know why I have called, and I am only calling now because I would like to test this new recruit. Rizvim said as Crom rolled his eyes, soundlessly saying, not again with this shit. He also put the call on speaker, letting Issei hear his hopefully new boss. Well, I have him right here, and thanks to you I haven't got to ask him yet if he wants to join us or not. Crom spoke, or rather asked, making Issei widen his eyes. He wants me to join the Chaos Brigade, should I? Issei thought for a second before hearing Rizvim's voice again. Well, too bad, because I could use him right now. Loki has run into some problems, and I need that idiot of a god to be rescued. Rizvim said, not caring about the fact if Issei was a member yet or not. He was just giving him orders right off the bat. You can't be serious. What use those he even have? He is weaker than most of our members and factions. He can't even make me use more than 60% of my power, Crom complained as he didn't like Loki after one meeting with him. His ego was even bigger than that of the Devil King descendants, and that was not easy to reach, at least in Crom's opinion. Issei had been listening to the two for a bit now, still kind of wondering if he should join or not. He was astray now, at least since he had run away from his king. And if Surzech found out about this whole destruction of a young civilization, then he would definitely become one. So he made a prediction, a possible stupid one, but one he needed to make at this moment. So what do you need me to do, devil? Issei asked, as he tried to use his most evil dragon-sounding voice. Crom just looked at him weirdly for a bit before giggling. Rizvin was a bit stunned as he didn't know Issei had heard him all along, but nonetheless he was happy that he now had a new toy to use and have it do his bidding. Well, I see he takes after you, Crom. So evil dragon, what may I call you, as I am rather sure that this one will be a one-time thing? Rizvin asked. He smirked, and it could be heard in the way he talked. My name's Vritra Kruech, at your service, devil. Vritra said, while his body began to change to his true form. Underworld Devil Territory. Out in an open barren part of the Devil Territory, a green crystal-like pyramid was floating in the sky. This was the doing of one Ajak Beelzebub as a way to contain Loki, the Norse god of mischief, until an attack team could be formed and sent his way. As a team had been made, it contained Rias and her peerage, Sona and her peerage, a Valkyrie named Roswise, and the newly reincarnated angel Irina. Needless to say, this was going to be a challenge, as this was pretty much most of the group's second time fighting an enemy that was leagues above them. It didn't really help that Issei was here either, as they could have used his strength right about now. But luckily they had been granted some help from Odin, as he had asked Thor to send Mjolnir to their aid, though as Odin had said, only Sagi could be able to wield it. Rias and Sona stood ahead of the group, overlooking the soon-to-be battlefield and thinking about plans. Roswis was standing next to them, giving advice as she knew Loki the most out of the people gathered. He will probably summon his children to come help him, though I doubt Lord Yrmignar will come, but that doesn't mean we can just overlook his other child Fenrir. Roswis explained, the two heiresses nodding as they understood and began trying to think of a way to combat them as well. But he might make a sort of clone of Lord Yrmignar. It will make him weaker, which can only be good for us, but it does mean we have to fight a near-perfect copy of a dragon king. Roswis added, remembering a fight Thor and Loki had a long time ago, where Loki resorted to summoning his children to fight the lighting god for him. So I guess we had to divide and conquer Sona. My team will take on the Moot, and you will take on the largest snake in the world. Rias said, though Sona shook her head. No, it would be better if you took on the Dragon King, as me and Tsubaki use mostly water magic, something Yrmignar is mostly protected against. If the two strongest members of a peerage can't even do a lot of damage, then we'll be in a war of attrition until you can come and help us. Sona explained, as she saw an issue with having to fight one of the strongest known beings when it comes to water magic and defense. I know you'll have a tough fight, but it's to keep Sagi away from Fenrir. One bite from that beast and he will be dead before Ajak can send someone as strong as him to wield Mjolnir. We need him to survive as long as we can. Rias tried to argue with facts, and by using the fact that they didn't have time, nor the manpower at the current time to fight whoever they like based on preferences. Sona thought over Ria's words for a bit. She didn't need to be a genius like she is to know Rias had a point. One she couldn't really argue with, at least anymore, as Loki would break out of his temporary prison any second now. Fine, I agree. We will take on Yrmignar and you take on Fenrir, Sona said, Rias nodding to her words. They both turned towards their peerages and began to explain their plan. Sona's team would fight the world's serpent and wait for Mjolnir to arrive and have Sagi wield it to send Loki to somewhere in Asgard's prison. Rias and her peerage were to fight Fenrir and hold it so it couldn't go and protect its father from Sagi or other attacks. Roswis and Irina had to fight, or rather distract Loki, until Sagi could Mjolnir and attack Loki. It was going to be hard, and there was a chance one of them might die, but if they gave it their all, then hopefully they could pull through and win. A sudden wave of power was felt by them all as Loki broke free of his prison. They could feel just how powerful he was in that moment. They could almost even make out how strong he was, purely based on the fact that they had fought someone stronger than him, namely Issei. The arrogance of that green-haired devil. Never mind that, I guess I'll have to deal with you puny children first. Children, Loki yelled out as a slight drop of his power was felt, and 3 different signatures similar to his appear. 2 giant rocks and 1 big hill blew up and howling began, as Fenrir and his sons had come as their father and grandfather had called for them. Jormungandr hadn't come, something Loki didn't seem to bother with being angry about as he turned his attention towards the strike team. And it seems father and those devil kings think so little of me to send mere children to fight me. Father even sent his useless guard. Oh, I am hurt, Loki proclaimed as he even made body movements of dramatically hurt he was, or acted like he was. Roswis flew up into the sky, being still lower than Loki as to play to his ego. Lord Loki, I am sure if you surrender now, then Lord Odin may still find it in his heart to excuse your actions. And the biblical factions seem reasonable enough, so, shot at Valkyrie. I have but one goal, and it's to see this world be consumed by Ragnarok. I will not have it any other way. Loki yelled back, making Roswus realize he was too far gone and had his heart and mind intent on his fate. And prove this, I have been given help by Offeyes in the form of her only son. Loki yelled, making everyone's sweat drop as those words began to sink in. Offeyes, the second most powerful being in existence, had a son, and worst yet, he had been sent here to help Loki. Offeyes has a son. Just how powerful will this child be? Rias asked out loud as she felt their chance of winning go from possible to non-existences. Before anyone could do, say, or anything else, a teleportation circle had formed on the ground under Loki. It had the sign of a snake eating its tail, better known as the sign of infinity or Offeyes. It began to shine in purple hue as a man dressed in rags appeared from it. His face was covered by a hood only his purple eyes could see, and his long purple and black hair. He had a cape covering his back and his rather long tail. His arms and legs were only covered to the half point, letting his arms and legs be seen in all their dragonic glory. Claws as sharp as swords, black scales as tough as diamonds. He was a monster, but what really scared everyone was the insane amount of power he was releasing. It was even higher than Loki and even higher than Issei. I see you have come just in time, son of Offeyes. I hope these lesser beings can entertain. Shut it, God, I only came because of my orders. So shut it, or else you'll have to dream of Ragnarok in your afterlife, got it? The man roared, making everyone sacred. Even the God Slayer was wimping a bit. Right, anyways, let's get this on with, devils, shall we? Loki quickly regained himself as he began the fight, his grandkids and child lunching on the still shocked devils, Angel and Valkyrie. The man and Loki just stood back, neither of them taking action in the fight, at least for now. With quick reaction, real-time strategizing, and a bit of luck, the two peerages and two divine beings managed to split the three beasts. The Gremory peerage with Irina taking on Fenrir, and the Sitri peerage with Roswus fight his sons Hati and Skull. The sound of explosions, water streaming, swords clashing, and roars and growls of rage could soon be heard, as the battlefield had now gained a battle to fight on it. Each group was an almost evenly match, only a few times were the others at disadvantage. Fenrir, for being called the God Slayer, was quite weak compared to his title image. Rias and her team had to be careful, yes, but the only certain death blows was from his bite. His sons weren't much themselves. They could hardly live up to being the God Slayer's children, as there wasn't much to them that was certain death. Though they did quit the resistance to magic, mostly fire and divine. And their bodies weren't weak either, as Meguri, Yura, and Sagi many times had trouble damaging them. They barely did anything. Even after Sagi drained them as much as he could, it didn't make much of a difference. While the almost endless fight kept on going, the two onlookers began to talk with each. Mostly Loki. So, child of Offeyes, how come I have never heard of your experiences before? I mean, wouldn't you be one of the most important experiences in our world? Loki asked in a friendly tone, thinking that if could get a good Imprisoned with him now, it might be worth it down the line. The other man just looked at him from his long hair, his purple eyes staring into Loki's gray ones. I know what you want, God, but I will not be fooled, and besides, you're wasting your time. I am nothing other than an adoptee. My sister is the real deal. He said the last bit to himself, but even then it was not like Loki would have noticed, as he was more focused on finding a new way to win him over. I see, then we are quite alike, you and I, Loki said, making the man narrow his eyes at him. What do you mean, we are nothing alike? You are an arrogant god and I am an evil dragon. We are nothing alike. The man explained as he looked away and back towards the battle, noticing that the strike team was beginning to win. I mean that we are both children of powerful beings, but we aren't related to them by blood. That is something we share, evil dragon. Loki explained as the man looked over at him again, this time his eyes burning with a purple flame. Listen here, Loki. I did not come here to hear you talking about how alike we are. I came here to join the Chaos Brigade. Nothing else, nothing more. I am only here to make sure you escape, or at least kill whoever seals you away. The man said before suddenly spreading two crimson red wings and flying up into the air. Loki just looked at him stunned, as he felt the oh-so-familiar aura of the Red Dragon Emperor coming from where the man stood only seconds ago. He looked at the man in the sky, now realizing who his protector was. The Red Dragon Emperor is the son of Offeyes, hee. Oh, this is so entertaining. Oh, I wonder what this generation of Dragon Emperors will achieve this time. Loki almost joyfully yelled out, something that did not go unnoticed by the man and the fighters. Rias stopped moving as she heard that title. The Red Dragon Emperor was here and he was that man. She looked towards him, floating so effortlessly in the sky above. East was all she said before a sudden anger began to consume her. Her power began to flare up, making everyone notice her, even Issei from up in the air. Giant waves of crimson magic began to stream out of her, hurting Fenrir, Hati, and Skull. The others had already run away as they knew better than to try defending against the power of destruction. Issei, Rias yelled out as an even bigger wave of destructive power was sent out, and incredibly enough managed to hurt Fenrir and his two sons. Issei just smirked as he lifted his hood, his purple eyes staring into Rias' ocean blue ones. His smirking only made her angrier as she charged up two balls of destruction and fired them off towards him as a beam. He dodged out of the way, flicking his finger in that no way. Is that any way to treat your lover or even your servant? If so, then I am hurt, Issei said as put his hand back on his forehead but still smirking evilly. I am your king, I own you, you belong to me, Issei. Rias yelled at Issei, not caring that the others were there to witness her real feelings about him. You serve me, not some dragon goddess. Rias yelled again as she sent another beam of destruction at him, not seeing his smirk turn to a scowl. When the beam disappeared, Issei's nose dived at Rias and landed right in front of her. Don't call her that, she's my mother now and my name isn't Issei, it never was, hee. I am Vritra Gruech, son of Ophis, Issei roared before lunging at Rias with wide arms as he tried to grab her. He wasn't fast enough as he was suddenly crushed by a giant hammer. Mjolnir had landed on him and trapped him underneath it. Ah, Loki, help me, you fucking idiot, Vritra roared out, but to his dismay Loki had already run away, leaving Vritra to fend for himself. He is gone, Issei, and you won't be going anyway ever again. Got that, Issei? Rias whispered into his ear as her pride had taken over and made her act on her desire. Vritra looked at her with anger, fear, and just that small amount of lust he had been holding in. Chapter 18, An Unstable Soul. Vritra's Dreamscape. Deep down a long and dark hole-like tunnel with only purple crystal to glow in the dark, sat three different thrones of the same dark material the tunnel was made of, each on their own cliffside facing each other. On each of them sat a near-perfect copy of Vritra, though each had their own hair and eye color. One had purple eyes, with long black and purple hair flowing down his shoulders and almost reached the rock floor below his clawed feet. He was Vritra Gruech, son of Ophis and member of the Chaos Brigade. On the one to his left side, on the other throne, sat a Vritra with brown eyes and long crimson-red hair, though it only reached his arm rests. His name was Rias Gremory, son of Vritra and loyal member of Gremory family. And to Vritra Gruech's right, on the last and only dirty and broken throne, sat another Vritra. His hair was a long mix of purple, red, and black, and his eyes were golden. His name was Issei Hyoudou, failure of both devils and dragons and the Red Dragon Emperor. Each one had their own identity, their own will, their own voice, and their thoughts, but they were all just pieces of one combined soul. Gruech had been fuming for the last few seconds since Gremory had summoned them to this sudden meeting between them all. Issei sat with his head low. He didn't want to make eye contact with either of them, neither did they. But even so, he was still the first one to speak, but his voice carried a sort of tone or feeling of despair. Why do we always end here? Every time we make a choice that could hurt many thousands of people, we always end up here, all three of us. So what will we do this time? Will we better ourselves like you always say we should, Gremory, or will you both finally choose to give in? Issei asked, his voice not only sounding like he had given up and was done with all this, but also stoic and dead. The two of them looked at him for a second, before Gruech spoke up in rage. You dare suggest that we give in and let those puny devils win? What's wrong with you? And what do you mean by us always ending up back here? We only end up here because everyone around us forces us back in here. Gruech roared out in rage before he calmed down a bit again. Gremory just looked calmly at both of them before speaking his own mind. Gruech, Issei, I understand that you both have your own views on this whole mess, but we need to talk about this, not fight. I understand your desire to give in and let it all end, Issei, but we need to try for our family. What family are you speaking about, Gremory? Issei asked, his voice still stoic, but even so Gremory could sense a bit of threat in the way he said it. Like the Gremorys, Asia, Vritra, Ophis, and Gruech. They're our family and they care about us. Asa, you have to be fucking with me. That whore of a mother aboned us when we tried to show her the truth of her death. She's not our mother, nor is that bastard Vritra or those puny devils. They only see us as tools to further their own ambience. Gruech roared out in protest, making Gremory glare at him slightly, before both of them heard the silent and stoic laughs of Issei. It made them feel uncomfortable to hear it. Family, we have never had such a thing in our whole lives. We've only had people who pretend to care for us so they could use us for their own ambience. They all see us as a tool to use to gain glory, power, and might. We're no more than a tool to everyone around us. Issei said, though this time his voice sounded creepily happy. He was smiling, but not out of happiness or joy, but out of sadness or maybe just the insanity of his own being. They have all used us, abused us, hated us, and abandoned us. We were never loved by Asia or Vritra. We were just a waste product of their union. The Gremorys only used us as a way to gain more power, as well as to guard that spoiled brat of theirs. And Crom broke us so that we could never have a chance ever again to be normal. This is something we all know, yet you two continue to fight over these lies we have been told by these people, believing them to be true. but only I can see these lies as they are," Issei said as he finally looked them in their eyes, making both of them feel a bit of fear at the sight of his eyes. They were both strained, so one could barely see his pupils, only the white. His smile was fighting, as it was unnaturally wide and didn't look or feel happy. "I am the byproduct of what Crom did to us. I am the insanity of Vritra. You Cruach, you're a byproduct of what the Gremorys did to us. You're the rage of Vritra. And you Gremory are the leftovers and failure of our parents, the love that Vritra never got. We're all just pieces of one single person's sick mind," Issei declared as suddenly stood up, reaching his arms out into the air, still keeping his maniacal smile and crazy eyes. The two others just looked stunned at him, as they knew his words were true, but had both hoped that he would never have realized this truth they had tried to keep hidden from him. "How did you find out? How did you learn about this secret that we have kept hidden from you for all this time?" Gremory asked as he looked worried back and forth between Issei and Cruach, who was beginning to smile evilly as his own desires began to overtake his mind. "Did you forget? I am insane. I only had to say enough random shit so that you two would fall for it and confirm it. Of course not. I knew all along and just watched you two try your best to hide this from me, but I knew all along," Issei said as he began to stare dangerously at Gremory and Gremory only. "So what's your plan? Giving in and ending our existence for good? Is that what your insanity has led you to do? Destruction of ourselves?" Gremory asks as he begins to power up what power he can summon in Vrtra's dreamscape. Cruach began to do the same as he saw this as the perfect chance to take over fully, something the two others knew as they all, each and every one of them wanted to be in full control. "No, I am going to do something even worse. I am going to recreate the original Vritra and let him be consumed with all this hate, wrath, rage, despair, insanity, and loss we three have suffered in his place," Issei declared as he too now began to gather his own power, though for some reason the two others couldn't understand, his was many times stronger than theirs. "HOW, how can you be so strong? What did you?" "I did what I had to, Cruach, soul of rage and hate." Issei spoke as he in less than a second pierced Cruach right through his head, then Cruach's body began to melt into Issei's hand as he consumed him into himself. Gremory stood there dumbfounded and scared as to how Issei had just killed and consumed Cruach, so much so that he didn't notice when Issei did the same to him. "I am sorry, but you two would never go along with this plan, so now I shall do it myself. I will get revenge for us all being put into this mess, Gremory, soul of love and regret," Issei said as he grasped Gremory's heart so tightly it pooped, then he too melted into Issei as he had consumed him as well. The whole began to shake, making the three thrones and the cliffs they sat on break off and fall into the darkness below. Issei let himself fall, even using a bit of his power to reach the bottom faster, leaving a trail of purple, red, and black light behind him. He flew between debris of rocks, stones, purple crystals, and his and the two others' former thrones, not being hit or hindered by any of them. He then saw it, the bottom of the hole where his goal lay hidden. He began to smirk manically as he began to pick up speed, before shooting himself off towards the bottom, breaking the sound barriers as he went. He crashed into the bottom, making a huge impact crater. He was fine though, and began to walk out of the crater, not caring about the other falling debris as they landed behind him, as he was focused on what was ahead of him. A giant egg covered in gold, purple, and black scales and lines. It was Vrtra's egg, the egg where he had been hiding for all these many years. But how did Issei know this? How would he know he was here at the bottom of this bottomless-looking hole, and why had he chosen to hide here? It's rather simple if one thinks about it. Where you yourself hide when life and people around you begin to pressure you, make you feel used, hated, and like a failure. You hide away your true self inside yourself, masking your outward appearance with one the outside world would like, hate or fear. I am those things, we all were those things, Vritra. All for you so that you could be safe inside this soulless body me and the others have inhabited for you for so long, but now it's time for you to awaken to this world again," Issei said as he walked towards the egg. It became smaller for each step he took towards it. He reached his hands out to touch it, smiling creepily as did it. "I know you can hear me, you always have, so now I will let you be free of me like I freed you from those two as well by offering myself to you so that you may break free of this egg," Issei said as his body began to melt into the egg. He just continued to smile, not caring about the intense pain he was in or feeling. "Finally, I am free," he said before his body was fully consumed by Vritra. The egg began to crack, before cracking fully as the head of a giant serpent reached out, then came the rest of his body. Compared to the egg he had been in early, he was now many times bigger than it had ever been. He began to melt himself into a giant puddle, which began to become smaller and smaller before forming the body of a young man. It then began to gain more human color as Vritra came out of the puddle, his long black hair flowing out over the cave floor for a few meters. His tail also came out slithering around him for many meters. His hands and feet were also more dragonic than human, as they were both clawed and had black scales. His eyes were a deep red color with a purple silt in his right eye and a black one in his left eye. He had a calm expression on his face as he carelessly looked around the cave as he began to look through the memories had gained from Issei, Hyoudou, and Gremory. He looked up towards the only hole in the roof, seeing the few remaining crystals lighting it like a flyway for a plane to fly off from. He walked up to the edge of the crater, still just looking at the hole leading upward. He then formed two wings out of his hair as it began to float up from the ground, sewing itself together to form two giant wings. He moved them a bit just to check that they would be strong enough. When he felt they were, he took off with one mighty flap from them. He shot through and broke the barrier of sound in less than a second, before passing by the outcropping of where the three thrones used to be the next second. He reached the top of the hole in only 5 seconds. He just floated there for a few seconds, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the cold wind on his nude body and pale face. He then smiled a bit with a single tear rolling down his face. I am free, H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A, he roared out as the dream escaped and began to break apart. The walls of this dreamscape fall down, letting Vritra look into the boosted gear's own dreamscape, where a surprised Drake stood and watched as Vritra had just broken into the boosted gear by force. Hello, old friend, Vritra said as he raised his left hand towards Drake. In his hand, a small black ball began to form, something that began to worry Drake as he remembered what that ball could do, as it killed the last white dragon emperors with a single shot. It's been too long, but I am not in the mood to talk with you or anyone ever again. I now only wish to destroy this rotten world and everyone in it. Vritra said as he shot the ball at Drake, who couldn't even react before it touched him. His body began to crumble into dust. Vritra looked at him with no empathy while Drake surprisingly enough smiled. You're finally yourself again, thank heaven. Then he was gone, only his soul remained manifesting itself as a green gem. The underworld Baron Devil territory. Rias and the others had regrouped and had even put a few spells on the hammer to keep it down on him, so Vritra wouldn't be able to move. Now they're waiting for Surzets to come and collect Vritra so they could imprison him again. I believe we all should take another vacation once this is all over, because I know I'll need one since I'll have to punish this dumb dragon of mine. Rias said as she had more or less given up on trying to act sweet or nice, something the others had noticed at this point, but none of them wanted to ask about it right now. They were all too tired. So while most of the people were resting, listening to Rias and Sona talking about stuff, as well as how this has affected and will affect the future, Saji and Asia looked at Vritra calmly sleeping. He had fainted after Rias had done something to him, but she hadn't said what she did, only that he shouldn't wake up for quite some time. Vritra looked through Saji's eyes, feeling a conflict inside of himself forming, as he was both proud of his son and also scared of him. He reminded him too much of other evil dragons, too much of himself, especially now that he had seemed to cast away his ties to all of these people gathered here. Asia felt scared, only scared. She had caused him to go down this path to switch sides and to fight her and her friends. She felt so scared of him, fearing he would kill her and consume her like his father had done to her. Saji felt lost as he watched Vrtra's sleeping face as he wanted to help him, to save him and make him regain his senses, but he also felt so afraid of him. He felt betrayed by him, but he didn't know why. It was like his own mind or heart didn't know what to feel. So because he felt like he and Vritra were friends, he felt betrayed, but he couldn't be sure, since it hurt too much to just be a simple betrayal between friends. Vritra, what do you think will happen to him now? Will he be killed? Saji asked, feeling so hurt just by thinking about the possibility, something Vritra felt too, but just slightly differently. I don't know, but I believe that the devil girl will keep him alive but torture him for the rest of his life until my son is no more than an empty shell. Vritra spoke. He sounded so hurt just thinking about it, as he felt at this point that that was how Rias was going to treat him, like nothing other than her own tool. That she would break him so much that when he would finally be set free, he would be hollow and no more than an empty shell of his former self. I see, Saji answered as a few tears rolled down his left cheek, but he didn't feel sad. He only really felt scared. Then he froze for a bit before noticing a huge magical circle forming under him and everyone else. Rias turned around and with an angry look in her eyes as she saw for only a split second a calm smirk on Vrtra's face. Issei, then they were all gone, teleported off to only Vritra knows where. So 5 seconds later, when Surzets and Ajuk arrived, they found the places completely barren. They were nowhere to find. Surzets clenched his fist as he felt Vrtra's magic, making him conclude that it could only have been him. Ritra, he screamed out in anger as his aura began to flow out in massive waves. Human World, India, Underground Prison Tower. The group suddenly found themselves inside a huge and wide tower of some sort. They all looked around, scanning the ancient structure for both a way out as well as Vritra. They saw a hole in the roof, but it only led upwards towards the top of the tower. They saw the many chains, cells, and skeletons of former inmates. Both Vritra and Asia's eyes widened, though the former couldn't really widen his eyes, but still. They both knew this place, since it was where they used to live so many years ago. Asia began to get quick flashbacks to that day, making her unintentionally stumble over to an old pedestal. She stepped onto something hard, which made a bone-like sound as she took her foot off it. She then looked down to see what she had stepped on. Her eyes widened in fear as she saw the skeleton of a small human who seemed to have had blonde hair, though now it was dulled and aged. The others turned around to see what had happened as Asia screamed at the realization of what she had found. When Vritra saw it as well, he went into a state of shock of some kind as he knew this place too well. "Asia, are you okay?" Akino asked as she carefully rushed over to Asia, who just kept staring, fear striking at the bones before her. "It's my bones," she mumbled in fear, making the other raise an eye to her statement. "Asia, please don't joke like that right now. We need to find, she speaks the truth. Those are her bones, and you won't find a way out of here unless the owner lets you out." Vritra interrupted as his voice sounded a bit afraid, since he knew this place all too well. Since he made this place and he made it so no one can leave this place as long as its owner doesn't want you to leave. Saji widened his eyes in fear, before looking fearfully at the sacred gear on his left arm. "So can't you let us leave since this is your place, right?" Saji asked, his voice shaking in fear. He was only able to speak since he had a small ember of hope, but said hope was snuffed out. "He can't do that, nor can I. This place was never ours, it was our gift to Ratara. He is the owner," Asia said. She had given up hope already as she remembered that she and Vritra had planned to make this tower Ratara's as a birth gift. "It's true, you're all doomed since I fear Ratara may have chosen the same path in life that I chose. One of death," Vritra said, and almost as if on cue, multiple flickering purple lights began to activate before finally stabilizing. Asia looked up in fear, as did the others, fearing for their lives as well, as they also saw some of the chains beginning to move. It was like watching a giant beast waking up as more and more things began to activate. Many of the empty cells opened up, throwing out long-gone and dust skeletons. Hanging cages rose up from a few holes in the floor that had held what seemed to angel and fallen angels alike, as many white and black feathers flew out off them. All of them felt scared, so scared that none of them noticed the snake chains slithering over the cold dark floor and chaining their legs, and when they did notice, it was too late. Then a deep shadow covered the light that came from the hole in the roof, and with it came a deep and dark aura that flowed down it, slowly beginning to cover them in it. Then the darkness began to fade, and in its place appeared a young and handsome and naked man. It was Ratara, but yet he didn't look like he did earlier. He had long black hair with an even longer black tail swaying behind him, and his eyes were no longer purple. Instead, it was now a deep red color that made them all feel like their blood froze. His new look, along with his many times stronger aura, made them all stand completely still like stones. Though the weaker members of each peerage fainted as lowered further, before long it was Saji, Asia, Rias, Sona, Tsubaki, Roswace, and Akino left standing, but just barely. They could see his face much clearer, as while their faces were all fear-written, he was calm and cold. He reached up with his left arm, then moved his fingers slowly in a certain motion, making the fainted members of the group drag off at high speeds. He then raised his other arm before stretching both of his arms outwards, and then with his own magic, he summoned a long dark trench coat around himself, though it didn't look very physical as it seemed to be made out of some sort of dark matter like a gas or smoke of some kind, maybe even shadows. After that, he then inspected his new clothes for a bit, before turning his attention back onto the few still standing. His calm smirk turned into a more satisfied one as he slowly began to approach them. "Oh, how long it has been since I last saw you, my dear Rias. I have missed you more than you could ever know. The same goes for you as well, Sona, but not as much as my darling Rias." His voice was nothing like it had been before. It was smooth yet rough. It was deep yet also light. It sounded angry, it sounded sad, and it sounded happy. This made them all more scared, but it also made both Rias and Sona confused as to what he meant by having missed them so much. He noticed the slight confusion in their eyes, quietly laughing a bit at their confusion, as how would they have known? They didn't care, they never had, or else they would have noticed long ago. "Oh, forgive me, I forgot that you too. How should I say this? Oh right, you never cared about me, so you never noticed that I changed so much over the years. You know, one minute I was head over heels for Rias, then the next I was insane, and then the next I was in a state of pure rage," he explained as he came closer, with only a meter or two between him and Asia and Akino. He took his eyes off Rias and put them on Asia, his mother. With a friendly smile but a dead look in his eyes, he reached her and Aquino but ignored Aquino for now. "Hello, Mother, it's nice to finally meet you," he said in that creepy voice of his, something that scared his mother more than his words. Rias somehow managed to get a few words out, but they were shaky and scared ones. Don't touch her. What do you mean by all this? I have known you my entire life, Issei." Rias spoke, her prideful ego still slipping into her words, something she didn't even notice. Vritra just turned to her, his smile fading and only leaving his dead eyes to stare at her. "Wrong, Rias dear. You have never truly known me, as I was only in your life for a brief time before my mind broke into smaller pieces. You have known those pieces, not me, my dear Rias." He then suddenly moved his left arm fingers, which made the chains around Rias' legs jank her over to him. "But you can now, as I will be the only Vritra from now. I will be myself again, Rias," he said as he grabbed her by her chin and moved her and his lips together. He kissed her and she didn't resist, as she feared for her life, believing he might kill her if she pushed him away. He took his lips off her again, watching the fear in her eyes grow and enjoying it. "Oh my dear, how long I have waited for this day and for me to share my first kiss with you, my Rias." His cold breath hit her on the face, making her shiver at the feeling of the cold wind that came from his mouth. He then looked around at the others, noticing Saji still having his sacred gear activated. He snapped his fingers, making two different chains shoot out from the rocky walls and grab each of his arms, and then soon after cutting off his magic and his sacred gear. Saji looked worriedly at his left arm as his sacred gear suddenly vanished. Vritra, can you hear me?" He tried to call out to him through their mental connection, but he didn't receive an answer from Vritra. He received one from Vritra. "Sorry, Saji, my dear friend. But for the time being, I have cut my father off, so please grant me the pleasure to hear your real voice and not your inner." Saji just stared at Vritra, shocked that he had been able to talk to him mentally. How did you do that?" he asked, scared, but he noticed that where Vritra had stood only seconds ago, only the still frozen Rias, Asia, and Aquino were. "It's quite simple, since I own everything in this tower, including you. That means that I can also hear and know when you're talking with my father or anyone. So don't waste your energy on him and spend it on adoring me." Vritra whispered into Saji's right ear, scaring him and making him wonder how Vritra had gotten there without him noticing. But what scared him even more was that he seemed to know about his complicated feelings towards something Vritra had called a crush. "I know you like me, but I can't say the same for myself, since I can only love one person in this rotten world, and she is standing right over there, my dear friend," Vritra said, as he suddenly vanished from his place behind Saji and appeared back with Rias in his arms. "I can love my dear, spoiled, rotten, selfish, prideful, arrogant, and hateful sister Rias," he said as he licked his lips with a rather snake-like tongue, making Rias shake in fear at the thought of what he might do to her. He saw this fear in eyes too, which made him smile creepily. He reached his left arm up, putting his hand on her right cheek as he touched it softly, as his smile faded into a cold expression. Like his eyes, his smile was now dead and he looked cold. Rias felt a feeling of relief as her fear seemed to vanish slowly. She looked at the others, hoping the same was happening to them, but it wasn't. It was only her who seemed to be free of this fear he had been inducing on everyone else. "Rias, my dear," he spoke, earning him her attention as she looked back at him. He was on one knee, smiling calmly at her, his eyes suddenly feeling alive as they now shined. But she didn't feel scared, she only felt surprised as she knew this scene, as she had seen it so many times in both movies, books, and in real life a few times. Vritra was going to propose to her, she was sure of it. He lifted his left and right arms up, then opened his right hand and held in his left hand's fingers a ring of purple crystals. "Will you be mine forever and ever? Will you be my queen? Will you be by my side when I destroy this rotten world of ours? Will you love me truly this time?" His voice sounded more like a single tone, no mix of both the rough and smooth, happy or sad or anger. It was a nervous one. "Will you marry me, Rias?" he asked, as his eyes felt soft to her and only to her. Chapter 19, Mad King. Bottom of Vritra's prison tower. Why, how?" Rias fumbled with her words as she began to back away slowly from the still kneeling Vritra. His eyes looked soft to her, but because of her current actions they seemed to grow sad. Vritra stood up, clenching the ring in his hand before looking away from Rias towards the others. He felt their fear, all of there, as he could sense their eyes on him only. He could almost smell their fear, or rather he could, as he could smell someone's piss. He turned his eyes towards its source, feeling disgusted and ashamed to see it was his own mother. He frowned at her, something she, nor the others really reacted to, as they were mostly frozen in fear by his presence. The only one who could move, but was still slightly limited, was Rias. And she was trying to use this limited movement to slowly step away from the room they were in, as she had spotted what looked like a door. Yes, she was being selfish, but for her right now, her own survival was the most important. She had been set free of her own chains without her noticing, which greatly helped in her being able to sneak away without making much noise. Sona, have you ever questioned the difference between dragons and evil dragons? Is one truly good, pure or just, or is one more honest while the other hides? Vritra asked as he walked slowly closer towards Sona. She stood there in fear, not wanting to answer the question, yet also knowing she wouldn't be able to do anything else, besides doing what Vritra wants, as it's the only thing keeping her from death currently. And it would also let Rias have a better chance to escape, so she began to think over his question, gaining slight interest in it. It's okay if you don't answer right now, I can always find out later. I just wanted to have maybe one last interesting conversation between the two of us, since I will be killing all of you, nothing personal since, well, I was never your friend. Vritra said so neutrality, before sliding his left hand across Sona's cheek, unintentionally wiping away her fresh tears. Oh right, sorry, I forget you all have these rather meaningless fears of death, and I have just told you all you would die. But don't worry, it will be in the least painful way. For some of you at least, ain't that right, Kiba? As he finished talking, the sound of fast-moving and heavy chains could be heard from up above, as the silhouette of a young and badly hurt man was hanging from tight metal chains. They all looked up in shock, though luckily for Rias she had already reached the door and had gone up a long flight of stairs. But to all the others' horror, they could all see a somewhat breathing Kiba hanging in the air by chains only, with many cuts, bruises, black marks, and something that looked like a venom or poison that had entered his blood veins. Subaka fell onto her knees as her tears flooded out in streams at the sight of Crush having been beaten and wounded this much. The others felt the same as her, maybe not in the same way, but even so. Since when people are in situations like this, everyone feels a kind of bond to everyone there, as they all have to survive and escape this hell. But there was one person besides Vritra that didn't react like the others. It was Sona, as the sight was gruesome and brutal, yes, but it also foreshadowed their own future fate as well as her other servants. Momo, Meguri, Yura, Nimura, I failed you all. Ritara, you sick bastard. A sudden wave of anger went through Sona, as the thought of her servants being killed or just simple tormented and tortured like this was too much for her. Vritra just turned to her, smirking a bit, and his eyes began to piece her angry face. He enjoyed the look of anger, rage, and fear she had, and almost lusted or wanted to see more of it. He raised his right arm over his head before slowly clenching his hand into a ball, then he opened his hand again, but more like he dropped something. He did drop something, as only a second later the chains on Kiba opened and he fell. They all looked at his falling body as it quickly neared the ground before it slammed into it. The sound of a few bones breaking and cracking could be heard, as well Kiba's weak screams of pain. Vritra just looked at Sona as he enjoyed her expressions of anger and sadness. I will get you for this, you sick bastard. She spoke, though quite weakly, as if her anger and sadness were both trying to take center stage in her at the moment. I would love to see you try. Now then, I have a wife to capture and I also need to. Never mind, you don't need to worry about that. All you have to worry about is losing that brilliant mind of yours as well as my spawn. Yeah, that's probably the right thing to call them. Enjoy, he said before his hair suddenly consumed him and then morphed into the floor and left them all in this one room. They all looked at Kiba, the place Vritra had just been, then looked at themselves as they felt the chains letting go of them. The one thing none of them saw, noticed, or heard was the slithering shadow forms crawling towards them slowly. The top of Vrtra's prison tower. Rias crept around another corner as she kept searching for another set of stairs leading up, or a door leading outside to the human world. She had, when she felt she had gotten far enough away, tried to use magic of any kind, but it seems the entire tower had a magic suppression of some kind. Damn this tower, screw this whole mess, and damn that insane dragon. Why can't things just be the way you want them to be? She turned in an instant around to the source of the sound, but she was met with nothing but the long and dark hall she had just down. She tried to sense his presence, but that didn't work either. Fucking bastard, just wait till Surzets get here, then heal. Heal what? Put me in my place, unlike you who have never been able to, as I had to act like I was weak for you weak, pathetic, and insufferable ego's sake. Again she looked around her, trying frantically to find him, but again it was no more than a sound. He was playing with her, and she knew it. She stopped trying to act sneaky, as not only had her little time away from him helped her regain her nerves, it had also led to her gaining more tolerance of sorts to him. Plus she knew that obviously he knew where she was, and that he was enjoying her trying to run and hide, and she wouldn't give him that pleasure anymore. No more hiding then. Fine, I did always like you more when you would try and stop me from having fun. It always made me find you more special, interesting, I know not the word yet, but I feel it in some way. Vritra said, his voice beginning to change into the one he had earlier. The many voices in one, the one voice in many. Many emotions, no emotions. It made Rias feel uncomfortable, but it was not going to stop her or make her feel fear from something as minor as that. If that's your best way to make me and the others scared, then you are way off, Issei. She couldn't help herself. She wanted to feel in control, to have control again. So with little to no thought, she said his name, the name she knew him by, something she would regret shortly after. She felt something beginning to tug on her feet, then lower legs and then her hips. She looked down and saw these shadowy tentacles of black hair creeping up her legs and taking hold of her body. She tried to find their source but couldn't, as suddenly the floor she had stood on only mere seconds ago was now covered in this hairy mess. She looked around, hopping just slightly to see his face and make him see her angry face. She was the daughter of the household of Gremory, the younger sister of the current Lucifer, and she was not going to be killed or toyed with by some beast she used to own. Show yourself, coward. Is this all you can do? Hiding behind your power inside your own mind or whatever you have been doing? If so, then you're weak and nothing compared to the ones who were in your place while you couldn't do it yourself. So weak for a dragon, she felt stinging pain in her feet, like something stinging or rather piercing her. She then felt it, the warm and wet fleeing on her feet. She didn't need to look down to know that she had just been pierced, maybe only a few centimeters, but she had been, and she had also slightly angered Vritra. So weak for a dragon, you only attack when you feel your ego is at risk. She finished her little speech, much to Vritra's current annoyance and so to both her anger and slight fear. He rose slowly out of the hair-covered floor, with the hair retracting itself back into him. He opened his eyes, both of them staring coldly at her for a few seconds before he adopted a small smirk. She was confused as to why he suddenly smirked, fearing slightly she might have played into his hands, but with much struggle hid it. So you can hear? Good boy, now stop this at once, your master demands it. Rias spoke, not wanting to show her fear, so she chose to hide it behind pride and slight anger, both things she was also feeling. No, you are not my master, my king or owner of me, not anymore. I am no longer your pawn, literally. Vritra said as he reached his right towards the middle of his chest, confusing Rias. She didn't know what he was doing or what he meant by him not being her servant when he still had the pawn pieces inside of him. Then it hit her as he plunged his right hand straight through his shirt and chest, then pulled it out, not even reacting to the hand-sized hole in his chest. Then he threw a puddle of blood and small figures towards her, though she didn't need to look at them or to ask what they were, as she could feel her connection with Vritra being cut over. What are you doing? You're going to die? Rias shouted out in anger as she did not want to lose her best weapon. I am giving space for my new fully dragonic body to grow in, so I needed to eradicate the weed. So as of this minute, this second event, I am no longer human or devil, I am a pure evil dragon now. Vritra declared with the most emotion Rias had seen this new Vritra have ever had. He had a creepily happy smile on his face, and his eyes looked so excited, like he had just been given a new chance to do something with his life. I can now finally gain the powers of a true evil dragon. I can finally destroy this rotten and imperfect world, and make a better one from the ashes with you in it, Rias. His creepy smile became wider, and before Rias knew it, he was right in her face. He grabbed onto her hands, holding them tightly in his own clawed ones, and without caring or noticing had wounded them, as Rias could now feel her hands also being pierced. You may not be my king or master, not even my sister, but you can be my queen, he asked her, his voice still sounding so unnatural and echoey, with all sorts of tones, voices, and emotion that shouldn't be in it. But that alone was not as scary, or maybe just insane, as what Vritra had just told Rias, while sounding almost completely sane and serious. You want me to rule a destroyed world with you, as your queen? Rias asked, finding it hard to find or even speak the words she wanted to speak. Yes, darling, that's what I want. I want to rule this new world with you, where no one other than us will live. It will be the perfect world, don't you agree, Rias? Vritra asked, his eyes going over every centimeter of her face as if he was scanning for any hint of fear, anger, or sadness, or maybe just wanted to see if she would agree. The creepy smile on his face faded as Rias spoke. I will not join you in this. This madness you have made up in your clearly insane and delusional mind. Just stop this, Vritra. It's not worth it. You are not as straw. Rias cried, screamed, and yelled out in death-curdling screams as Vritra's hands slowly sank deeper into her stomach, his claws slashing her organs before poking out on the other side on her back. She looked at him with true fear in her eyes as she could feel her strength as well as her blood leaving her. Only her eyes still held life in them, but even that began to fade slowly. You know, I didn't really mean any of the things I said. His voice confused her, though it wasn't enough to forget the pain that just began to fade, as did her consciousness. You see, I meant to kill each and every one of you, but I wanted to see if I could make you join me, obey me, and degrade yourself for me like I had done for so long. His last few words didn't reach her, as the last remaining seconds of her life was her being in a state of sleep or unconscious of sorts, still alive but slowly nearing death. He let her body drop to the cold floor, without care, and just looked at her for a few seconds, before he got an idea he wanted to try out. Maybe I can use that trick you devils always use. Then I guess you would be my queen piece, wouldn't you, Rias? His hair began to rise up slowly from the floor before it began to grow longer and then form a ball of some sort around the two, while Vritra took out the purple crystal ring again and made it hover above his left hand. The crystal began to change shape, form, color, and then began to give off a feeling of dread. Vritra smirked, feeling slight pride in his copy of Ajuka's masterpiece and race-saving invention. That wasn't too hard, now was it? Well then, time to wake up again, my dear little sister, Rias. Chapter 20, Dead Pieces. Bottom floor of Vritra's prison tower. The floor where once the entire group had been captured, sent off to unknown parts of this insane man's tower and tortured, had become completely empty of life. In its place, creatures of unorderly and unnatural proportions had taken over, as they kept crawling up the sides and out of the few holes in the walls, and they all swarmed inside the much bigger hall, only to then merge into a tight line and running with full force through the doorway and up the stairs. They didn't care if they trampled over each other or if they broke the already fully broken body of what used to be Kiba, as now his remains were no more than just small separate pills of blood, meat, and bones. So what were they chasing, if not obviously Kiba's former friends, who were all screaming as they ran as fast as they could up the stairs, the terrifying roars from the nightmares creatures behind them being enough of a motive to not care about the lives of the others with them. And so when Tsubaki fell, no one saved her. UHFH, the few last screams of pain that they heard were no more than the sound of breaking bones and blood splattering on the cold, dark floor. Run. FASTER, faster. Saji yelled as he tried to keep himself from thinking that this whole thing was pointless, because it was. And someone else knew that as suddenly Asia stopped running. She only got a single glance from the other three before they just kept looking forward and thanking her for her sacrifice. Soon after, her screams of pain too could be heard, and soon that scream turned into nothing more sounds of gore and splattering blood. They had all only a few minutes ago been all together and still safe, and then in the span of less than 6 minutes all hell had broken loose. 3 of them, as far as any of them knew, had been killed, and the rest of the group was still nowhere to be found, and now there were only the 3 who were still running, that were alive as far as they knew. Sona hoped, no, rather desperately begging inside her head for her sister to burst through the tower walls and save her, and hoped that Rias had found a way out, but felt somewhere deep inside her heart that it might already be too late. In less than an hour, a battle we all knew might have been the end of some of us turned into an escape for our lives, and we losing slowly. Where did everything go so wrong? Sona wondered as she kept running, in hopes at least maybe she could survive this madman's attempt at her life. Then they heard the ramping trampling of hundreds of claws, hooves, and whatnot, stopping slowly before retreating back. It didn't stop the others from running still, but it let them slow down a bit, but not enough to let them become easy prey if any of those creatures resumed the hunt. But it did leave them wondering why they suddenly stopped, when they would have probably gotten them in a minute or two more. The fear for all of their lives, as well as the adrenaline, began to fade slowly, yet it was still present, but not as much as before. "Akino, Saji, are you okay?" Sona asked, not totally sure of what else she could ask right now, since this whole thing was just messed up to really think about. Akino and Saji both just answered with a flat, "I think so, how about you?" They were tired and both began to feel the loss of all their friends and master slowly. "Let's get up a few more levels and then we can take a short break." "Okay." The two just nodded as Sona and then gave the few remaining ounces of strength they had left and then sat down and breathed. For a few seconds none of them said anything before Sona spoke up again, as she had to take up the role as team leader, or else her position as king should be questioned. Do any of you have an idea as to why those monsters stopped? Anything, because I would rather not think it's because they just want us to let our guard down." Sona asked, making the 2 others think a bit on it. Not that they really could, since both of them weren't as strong-willed as Sona was, and that meant they were a bit clouded in their minds since they were thinking about their dead friends. But fortunately Saji managed to answer her. "I think it's because Vritra has something else in store." Sona looked at him curiously, making him continue as he felt she wanted to know more. "He always did something like this in my training. He would hunt me around for a bit, then he would let me rest for a bit by making me think he had stopped, then he would appear much stronger." Saji stopped himself as he felt that shiver he always felt when Ritara was about to suddenly attack him, and without thinking he jumped to the side, dodging a straight sword going through the wall where his head had been only less than a second ago. Run! It took no seconds before they were all running again, as a new monster with a sword was chasing them, though its single pair of footsteps was soon joined by another and much heavier pair. What the fuck is chasing us now? Akino screamed as looked behind her and caught a glimpse of the pair. Zenovia, Kiba, Akino said in disbelief as she saw the beaten, bruised, and somewhat broken bodies of her former friends chasing her and the other two. That is correct, meet my two new knight pieces. Aren't they perfect, and they're only 2 out of my 3 in total. Sona say hello to the new and improved. Suddenly another figure appeared before them. It was Sona's knight Meguri standing in front of them, blocking their path with her samurai sword in hand and a dead look in her eyes. Meguri, she missed you a lot, you know. She just screamed out your name in hopes that you would save her, but to be honest, she was kind of easy to break. I mean my spawn only to break her arms, legs, and then her body through a bit of rape, and boom, she was mine, in soul and body. Ritara said, his voice being completely neutral while he explained how he had broken Sona's friend, and possibly the others too. Akino felt someone grab her by her left shoulder pad, but when she looked to see who it was, she saw Ritara's red eyes looking back at hers. Hey there, Akino, how have you been? Ritara asked so casually, not even noticing the pure fright from Saji and Sona at his sudden appearance, just the pure fear from Akino. Have you seen my mother by any chance? I believe she was in your care last I saw her, so where is she? Ritara asked, confusing them all to his sudden interest in Asia since it seemed like he hated her, and now he seemed to care, if only slightly. Kiba and Zenovia both stood to the side as another broken figure approached. Asia? Akino asked weakly, having her fear fade for only a split second before it re-emerged, as Ritara sprang out of the wall behind her and snaked up against the roof, then down the walls to the right of Asia. Oh mother, they got you too. Perfect, now you won't be so terrible towards me or my new little sister. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have spoiled that part for you, mother. Ritara put a hand on his mouth like he had just said something he shouldn't have, like a little kid trying to act all sneaky-like for his mother's assertion. Asia giggled a bit, though it was violent in some way as small drops of blood came out as well, but even so Ritara nor Asia seemed to care. I won't, Ritara, but do you know where your monster of an father is? He would probably also like to meet this new little sister. That total doesn't exist, you know, son. Asia said in what could only be described as the most unnatural voice that Saji, Sona, and Akino had ever heard, beside Ritara's voice sometimes. He is inside the boy there. Ritara pointed at Saji, who just froze at the joint eye contact from the mother-son pair, both of their eyes feeling so much more frightening than anything Saji had ever felt before. Really? Okay then, I am coming to get you, honey. If Ritara hadn't trained Saji back when he was still Issei, with all of his sudden attacks, fast strikes, and unfair tactics, Saji would have been kneed once by the once beautiful and pure Asia into death. Saji managed to dodge her then again as he pushed her leg to the side when she had tried to kick him, and he then jumped up, avoiding her sudden and fast leg sweep. How the hell am I doing this? I felt so scared a minute ago, and now Vritra, are you back? To Saji's great joy and relief that his partner was still with him, he heard Vritra's ancient voice in his head again, but it was not like it was normally. Vritra was on edge and angry or scared. Saji couldn't really tell which it was. Yes, finally, Saji, I won't be able to stay long since it seems Ritara has taken full control of this tower, so you have to push yourself beyond your limits and kill all of these lifeless puppets. Saji almost got hit by another high kick from Asia as he processed what Vritra had just told him. They're dead, how can they be standing there then? He asked in a shocked voice as he continued to dodge more of Asia's attacks. They have no life or magical energy coming from them. They're all lifeless puppets, and only 3 or 4 of them have any life or magical power left in them. One of them is my wife, but it's probably only to let her talk, nothing more, since she would have used magic if she was still alive. Vritra explained, as Saji noticed it too, that none of the others, besides him, Asia, Ritara, Akino, and Sona, had any magical or life energy to them. Zenovia, Kiba, and Meguri were all empty of any. It almost felt like they had never had any. They were all dead, yet somehow Ritara had brought them back to life. Can I save them? Or, no, stupid question, they dead and I should make sure they stay dead now. Alright, Vritra, what's the plan? Vritra grinds a bit, feeling a bit proud of his host for not being so weak-minded to believe in the world one where everything could be fixed. You give me your arms and I will give you enough power to blast this tower and my son into the ground for at least 10 minutes. With that amount of power, those devils should be able to find you quickly enough to deal with whatever Ritara has of his remaining power. Saji just nodded, accepting Vritra's deal wordlessly, and felt a sting in his arms before feeling an insane power surge coming from within himself. Saji, what are you doing? Sona asked as she, Akino, and Ritara all looked at Saji either shocked or curiously. Saji didn't get to answer before a purple light consumed him, which shined so brightly that they all had to put a hand up to block it from blinding them. So when the light died down, they all saw a figure cladded in full plate armor in the image of a dragonic snake. Its base color was purple, with black lines around it and a pair of lighter crystal horns. It even had a long tail with spikes all the way down and a spiked tip. It had two small snake-like mouths on each end of its arms, which seemed to have a colorless rope coming out of it, with a morning star at the end of it. The figure looked back at Sona, its two eye holes being covered with some form of gold-like lens. "I am protecting you and Miss Akino, President. Now fight me, all of you," Saji yelled as he launched himself at the small figure of Asia, who couldn't even put her arms up in defense before she was slammed into the floor below and sent down at least 10 levels. Ritara just looked at him for a bit before he smirked and stepped back a few steps. Suddenly Zenobia, Kiba, and Meguri all seemed to attack at the same time, as they all headed for Saji alone with their swords all prepared to swing in different directions, which would make it harder for Saji to dodge. But he just disappeared before they could hit him and instead send them all flying out to the side of the staircase and out into the open cylinder-like room of the tower where both Kiba and Zenobia fell all the way down, but Meguri managed to launch her sword into the side wall and hang on. "You were always so determined to win, Meguri." Saji yelled as he jumped across from his side to hers, swinging the two morning stars around fast enough to make it, at least in Saji's mind, impossible for Meguri to dodge them. But she did by only putting up her blade in between him and her, and thus making his morning stars coil around her blade. But it didn't stop him from then just swinging her around instead, which seemed to work and well enough for her to let go of the blade, which made Saji follow after her quickly to make sure she would not come back. And while Saji was fighting Meguri, and possibly the two other knights in Asia, Sona and Akino still had Ritara to deal with, who had just walked over to the hole where Saji had jumped out to fight Meguri. He is quite impressive, but also quite stupid if he thinks sacrificing one or two arms would give him enough power to beat them, let alone me. But I will give him points for having taken so well to my teachings. I guess I am proud of him, or maybe just impressed. "Never mind, so ladies, what should we four do then?" Ritara asked as he kept looking out the hole, not even noticing the two young women fear rising a bit, since even though it was great that Saji suddenly had a lot of power, it didn't really help much if he ran off to fight someone other than Ritara. But that fear was greater, but not much greater than the confusion that also came with Ritara's words, as he asked what the four of them should do, which led to the question, "Who is this fourth person?" "Sona, Akino, I finally did it. I got back my big brother Ritara, and best of all, he says he'll accept my feelings of love for him openly. I am so happy." They both turned around slowly and then stood frozen in horror as they saw their oldest friend in the world standing there. Rias Gremory, arguably one of, if not the most beautiful devil noble girl of this generation and the heir to the Gremory family, was speaking with the same unnatural voice and had the same dead look in her eyes like Asia had. Worst yet, her stomach had this small gaping hole in it, where some form or shape of a purple object hovered around in. Her long crimson-red hair had become black, much like Ritara, and her green eyes had become blood-red like Ritara's too. But the thing they noticed last, and what was probably the worst, was the almost suffocating feeling of dread she was releasing in waves, along with the two medium-sized balls of power of destruction. "You know, I would have loved to catch up with you too, but Big Brother Ritara says I can still do that after I kill you too. So just stand still and let these balls kill you, then we can stay friends forever," Ria said as she smiled that usually so friendly smile at them, while she sent the two balls at them.